I sprinted through the sliding glass doors of Seattle Children's Hospital. The heavy thud of my tactical boots echoed sharply against the pristine white tiles. I had just stepped off a covert military transport plane from a 6-month cyber intelligence deployment straight into a mother's worst nightmare. My 6-year-old daughter Aaliyah was lying in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. When I pushed open the door to her room, she shrank back against the pillows in pure unadulterated terror before realizing it was me. The surgeon would soon look at her shattered arm and tell me that these were defensive wounds. Meanwhile, my husband Jamal and his mother Beatrice were sitting in the VIP waiting room laughing over artisanal lattes. They thought my classified job kept me blind to their actions. They had no idea the cyber operative they betrayed was about to dismantle their entire lives. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe no one should ever get away with hurting an innocent child. My chest heaved as I navigated the labyrinth of hospital corridors. I was still wearing my deployment gear. The dark canvas pants and moisture-wicking combat shirt clung to me thick with the sweat of a 30-hour journey across the globe. The emergency message from the hospital had bypassed my usual encrypted channels, reaching my secure comms right as my unit was extracting from a secure facility. The message simply stated that my daughter had been admitted in critical condition. My commanding officer took one look at my face and put me on the first transport plane stateside. Every step I took toward the intensive care wing felt like walking through quicksand. My mind kept looping back to the past 6 months. I had not seen Aaliyah's face on a screen since my deployment began. Jamal, my charming and seemingly devoted husband, always had the perfect excuse. He would say that Aaliyah was already asleep, or that the video calls disrupted her routine and made her act out at school. He insisted that maintaining a strict schedule was best for her emotional stability while I was away. I bought his lies because I was completely submerged in complex networks defending national security against unseen threats. I was an expert at identifying digital anomalies and intercepting malicious code, but I had completely failed to see the very real threat living inside my own home. I rounded the corner into the intensive care unit, ignoring the startled looks of the medical staff. The sharp scent of antiseptic and floor wax burned my nose. I found room 412 and pushed the heavy wooden door open. The rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors filled the quiet space. Aaliyah looked so incredibly small in the center of the large hospital bed. An intravenous line was taped to the back of her tiny brown hand. A thick, heavy cast consumed her entire right arm, extending past her elbow. But it was her face that made my breath catch in my throat. Dark purple and yellow bruises painted the side of her cheek, and a sterile bandage covered a cut near her hairline. The hinge of the door clicked softly as it closed behind me. At that slight noise, my 6-year-old daughter flinched violently. It was not a normal startled jump. It was a full-body reflex of absolute terror. She pushed herself backward, pressing her small frame as far into the mattress as possible, trying to blend into the hospital wall. She raised her uninjured arm over her face in a desperate protective shield. My heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. I have spent my career analyzing human behavior and identifying threat patterns. A child who has been in a simple bicycle accident does not cower in terror at the sound of a door opening. A child who feels safe does not instinctively shield her face from an approaching adult. That reflexive flinch is a survival mechanism. It is a learned response to a repeated threat. Aaliyah peeked through her fingers, her wide brown eyes darting toward the doorway. When she finally processed that it was me standing there, the terror in her face melted into something that broke me completely. Her lower lip quivered, and she let out a loud, racking sob. "Mommy!" She cried, her voice hoarse and fragile. I crossed the room in 2 strides, falling to my knees beside her bed. I wrapped my arms around her, careful to avoid the tubes and wires, and pressed my face into her neck. She buried her face in my shoulder, gripping the fabric of my tactical shirt with her good hand, as if she was afraid I might disappear. I held her tightly, rocking her back and forth, whispering promises that I was home and that nothing would ever hurt her again. I held her for a long time, letting her cry until her breathing finally slowed. I took in the extent of her injuries up close. The bruising on her face was not consistent with a simple fall. The patterns looked distinct, deliberate. The anger rising inside me was entirely different from the focused adrenaline of my deployments. This was a deep primal rage. Someone had hurt my child while I was serving my country, and I was going to systematically dismantle their entire world. As I gently brushed the hair back from Aaliyah's forehead, a throat cleared behind me. I turned to see a hospital administrator standing in the doorway, flanked by a burly security guard. The administrator was a tall, stern-looking woman holding a tablet tightly against her chest. "Excuse me," the administrator said, her tone clipped and authoritarian. "You cannot be in here." I stood up slowly, my military training kicking in to keep my expression completely neutral. "I am Kendra Washington," I said, keeping my voice low to avoid upsetting Aaliyah. "This is my daughter." The administrator glanced at her tablet without an ounce of empathy. "I understand that, Mrs. Washington, but you are not on the approved visitor list. The primary custodial parent has explicitly requested that no unapproved individuals be allowed contact with the patient." My jaw tightened. "I am her mother. I share full legal custody with my husband. There is no custody order preventing me from seeing my own child." "I am sorry, but Mr. Washington and Councilwoman Beatrice Washington have made the directives very clear," the administrator replied, invoking my mother-in-law's political title as if it were a shield. "They stated that your unexpected arrival would be highly disruptive to the child's recovery. They have requested that any hysterical or combative individuals be escorted off the premises immediately for the safety of the patients." The audacity of the situation was staggering. Jamal and his mother had not only failed to protect my daughter, but they were actively using Beatrice's local political influence to block me from my own child. They had labeled me the unstable absentee mother before I even stepped foot in the building. They were trying to control the narrative and silence any questions I might ask about Aaliyah's injuries. I looked at the security guard, who shifted his weight uncomfortably, clearly aware of the tension in the room. Then I looked back at Aaliyah, who was watching me with wide, fearful eyes. Her grip on my sleeve had tightened, and I could feel her small body trembling. I could not risk making a scene. Getting dragged out of the hospital by security would only play perfectly into the narrative Jamal and Beatrice were constructing. It would give them the exact ammunition they needed to justify keeping me away from my daughter. I had to play this smart. I had to secure my position before launching an offensive. I gently untangled Aaliyah's fingers from my shirt and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I will be right back, baby girl," I promised softly, looking directly into her eyes so she would know I meant it. "Mommy is just going to talk to the doctor and handle some paperwork. I am not leaving you again. I promise." I turned back to the administrator, my posture rigidly straight. "Where is my husband right now?" I asked, my voice stripped of all emotion. The administrator gestured toward the hallway, looking relieved that I was complying without a fight. "He is in the private family waiting area on the second floor." I nodded once and walked past the security guard, my tactical boots silent on the hospital linoleum. The rage inside me was absolute and razor sharp. I was going to find Jamal and Beatrice. I was going to look them in the eyes, and I was going to find out exactly what kind of game they thought they were playing. Let me know in the comments below how you would have handled seeing your child in that hospital bed. The true depth of their betrayal was about to be revealed, and I needed every ounce of discipline I possessed to stop myself from tearing them apart right there in the waiting room. The heavy rubber soles of my tactical boots hit the concrete stairs with a rhythmic thud that matched the pounding of my heart. I took the steps to the second floor 2 at a time. My mind was racing rapidly, sorting through the data points I had just gathered in the intensive care unit. Aaliyah violently flinching at the sound of a door. The massive, suffocating cast on her arm. The distinct, unnatural pattern of the bruising on her cheek. The hospital administrator stepping in to actively block my access to my own child. None of it aligned with a standard pediatric emergency. Every instinct I had, honed over a decade in cyber intelligence, told me I was walking into a highly hostile environment. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the VIP family waiting area. The air up here was entirely different from the clinical antiseptic smell of the floors below. It smelled of roasted espresso beans and expensive floral perfume. The lighting was soft and warm, specifically designed to soothe wealthy donors and local elites. I scanned the room, my hand resting instinctively on the strap of my tactical bag. They were sitting in the far corner, bathed in the soft glow of a designer floor lamp. Jamal, my husband, the man I had trusted with my world, was leaning back in a plush leather armchair. He was wearing a crisp, tailored button-down shirt, looking as immaculate as he did on the day we got married. Sitting across from him was his mother, Beatrice. She was draped in a tailored ivory suit, her signature pearl necklace resting perfectly against her collarbone. They were not weeping. They were not holding hands in silent prayer. They were not pacing the floor with the agonizing anxiety of a family whose youngest member was hooked up to cardiac monitors. They were laughing. Jamal threw his head back, a genuine relaxed chuckle escaping his throat. Beatrice smiled, taking a delicate sip from an artisanal ceramic coffee cup. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening as Beatrice complained about a seating arrangement dispute at their recent country club gala. They were entirely unbothered. My 6-year-old daughter was trembling in a hospital bed a floor below them, and they were casually discussing a seating chart. The glass door swung shut behind me, the metal latch clicking loudly in the quiet room. Jamal turned his head. The transformation was instantaneous and chilling. The relaxed, jovial husband vanished in a fraction of a second. I watched his spine stiffen, his eyes widen and his mouth fall open. He immediately manufactured a mask of profound exhaustion and deep sorrow. He stood up abruptly, setting his coffee cup down with a deliberate, shaky hand. "Kendra," he gasped, his voice suddenly thick with fabricated emotion. "You are here. You made it." He rushed across the room, his arms wide open, playing the role of the desperate, grieving father seeking comfort from his wife. I did not move. As he reached for me, I shifted my weight and took a sharp step to the right. His arms grasped empty air. He stumbled slightly, clearly thrown by my physical rejection. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dangerously low. "What happened to my daughter?" Jamal recovered quickly, running a hand over his face to simulate sheer exhaustion. He sighed heavily, looking at me with eyes full of fake sympathy. "It was a bicycle accident, Kendra. It was just a terrible freak accident. She was riding her bike down the steep hill near the park and she lost control. She took a really nasty tumble. I was terrified, but the doctors say she is going to pull through." I stared at him, my analytical mind processing his micro-expressions. His breathing was too steady. His eyes kept darting to the left, a classic indicator of a rehearsed narrative. He was lying. "A bicycle accident does not cause a child to cower in terror when a door opens," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "A bicycle accident does not result in the distinct defensive bruising I just saw on her face." Jamal stepped closer, lowering his voice into a soothing, patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "Kendra, listen to yourself. You are overreacting. You just stepped off a military transport plane. You have been deployed in a high-stress environment for 6 months. You are exhausted and your mind is playing tricks on you. You are bringing battlefield paranoia into a normal childhood accident. You need to calm down before you upset Aaliyah." Before I could tear his pathetic gaslighting to shreds, Beatrice stood up. She smoothed the front of her ivory blazer and walked toward us, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. She did not offer a hug or a word of comfort. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my dust-covered tactical pants and heavy boots with unmistakable disgust. "Kendra, you need to lower your voice immediately," Beatrice instructed, her tone dripping with condescension. "This is a respectable establishment, not one of your military barracks. There are important people in this hospital, and I will not have you causing a public scene and embarrassing this family. Jamal has been doing an exceptional job handling this tragedy while you were off playing soldier. You should be thanking him, not throwing baseless accusations around in a public waiting room." I squared my shoulders, looking directly into Beatrice's eyes. I was acutely aware of her local political power, but right now she was just another threat vector. My daughter is covered in bruises, Beatrice, I said, matching her icy tone. And my husband is standing here smelling like expensive cologne, completely unbothered. I am not thanking anyone until I get the medical charts. Jamal sighed, shaking his head like a martyred saint. See? This is exactly what I told the hospital administrator. You are completely unstable right now. You need to go home, take a shower, and sleep off this deployment fatigue. I have everything under control here. I was about to demand the keys to his car when the heavy glass doors of the waiting room swung open. A tall, formidable African-American woman in a pristine white coat over blue surgical scrubs walked into the room. She carried a digital medical tablet clamped tightly to her chest. Her badge read, Dr. Evelyn Carter, Pediatric Surgery. Her expression was intensely serious, her eyes scanning the room with sharp professional authority. She bypassed Jamal entirely, her gaze sweeping past his outstretched hand. I am looking for Aaliyah, Washington's mother, Dr. Carter said, her voice commanding immediate attention. Beatrice instantly stepped in front of me, attempting to use her physical presence and political weight to block the doctor's line of sight. Councilwoman Washington, Dr. Beatrice announced, flashing a perfectly polished diplomatic smile. We spoke earlier this morning. I am handling all the medical updates and administrative affairs for my son and my granddaughter. You can direct any information to me. Dr. Carter stopped. She did not return the smile. She looked at Beatrice with a completely unyielding expression, unimpressed by the political title or the designer suit. Then Dr. Carter deliberately stepped to the side, breaking Beatrice's physical block, and locked eyes directly with me. She took in my tactical uniform, my rigid posture, and the barely contained fury radiating from me. I am not here to give an administrative update, Dr. Carter said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, carrying a weight that made the air in the room suddenly feel very thin. I specifically need to speak with the child's biological mother. In private. Right now. Jamal stepped forward, his face flushing with sudden anger. I am her father, he demanded. Whatever you have to say to my wife, you can say in front of me. Dr. Carter turned her head slowly, looking at Jamal with an expression of absolute ice. No, Mr. Washington. Dr. Carter replied, her grip tightening on her medical tablet. I absolutely cannot. Mrs. Washington, please follow me. I followed Dr. Evelyn Carter out of the waiting room, leaving Jamal spluttering with manufactured outrage. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind us, cutting off his protests. Dr. Carter did not speak as she led me down a narrow, windowless corridor deep within the intensive care wing. The silence was heavy, broken only by the squeak of her rubber clogs and the heavy thud of my boots. We entered a small, dimly lit consultation room. The only illumination came from a large digital viewing screen mounted on the wall. Dr. Carter locked the door behind us and turned to face me. Her professional armor was still firmly in place, but I could see the deep lines of sorrow etched around her eyes. She tapped the screen, bringing up a series of high-resolution skeletal scans. My breath caught in my throat. Even without medical training, the sheer number of bright white fractures webbing across the fragile gray bones was terrifying. Dr. Carter pointed a slender pen at the image of Aaliyah's right arm. The bike accident story your husband provided does not align with the trauma we are seeing here, she stated, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. This is a severe spiral fracture of the ulna. It requires a tremendous twisting force to snap a child's bone in this specific manner. A simple fall from a bicycle onto pavement causes transverse or linear breaks. A child throws their hands out to catch themselves. They do not twist their own arm until the bone shears. My military training fought a desperate battle against my maternal instinct. I forced myself to look clinically at the images, treating them like a satellite reconnaissance map of an enemy compound. I needed data. How old is that fracture? I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Dr. Carter met my gaze, her eyes unwavering. That is the most concerning part, Mrs. Washington. Notice the calcification around the edges of the break. This spiral fracture is not new. It has been healing improperly for at least 3 months. It was never set. It was never treated. The fresh trauma that brought her in today simply aggravated an existing horrific injury. She swiped the screen, bringing up scans of Aaliyah's ribs and collarbone. She pointed to faint, shadowy lines along the rib cage. These are microfractures in varying stages of healing. Some are weeks old, some are months old. The bruising on her face and neck are textbook defensive wounds. This child was hurt more than once, Mrs. Washington, and the person who hurt her is someone she desperately fears. The air was sucked completely out of the tiny room. 3 months. I had been deployed for 6. Halfway through my classified assignment, my daughter had her arm twisted until it broke, and my husband had simply left it to heal improperly. He had watched her suffer. He had hidden her off camera during our encrypted calls. He had lied to my face while my child lived in a nightmare. The rage that ignited in my chest was blinding. It was not a spark. It was a detonation. I did not say a word to Dr. Carter. I spun on my heel, unlocked the door, and marched back down the corridor. The tunnel vision of combat had taken over. I was going to walk back into that VIP waiting room, drag Jamal out of his plush leather chair by his tailored collar, and break every bone in his body until he felt a fraction of the agony he had inflicted on my little girl. I was going to make Beatrice watch. My boots slammed against the linoleum as I rounded the final corner toward the waiting area. But my path was suddenly blocked. 2 massive hospital security guards stepped into the center of the hallway, forming a human barricade. Flanking them was the same stern hospital administrator from earlier, her face set in a mask of bureaucratic hostility. "Mrs. Washington, you need to halt right there," the administrator commanded, raising her hand. I did not slow down. "Move out of my way," I growled, calculating exactly how long it would take to bypass the 2 guards without causing permanent injury. Before I could close the distance, a figure stepped out from behind the wall of uniforms. Beatrice Washington stood there, her ivory suit pristine, a look of utter triumph resting comfortably on her face. She had a cell phone clutched in her hand. While I was looking at X-rays, she had been making phone calls. She had mobilized the entire hospital administration against me in less than 5 minutes. "I am afraid you are leaving, Kendra," Beatrice said smoothly, her voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "The hospital administration and I agree that your presence is highly detrimental to this facility." The administrator stepped forward, pointing toward the exit. "Councilwoman Washington has invoked her authority as the primary emergency contact acting on behalf of your husband. We have strict protocols regarding disruptive family members in the intensive care unit. You are agitated, aggressive, and dressed in combat gear. You are frightening the staff and posing a risk to the patients. I am officially asking you to vacate the premises. If you refuse, these guards will physically remove you, and I will have the Seattle police arrest you for trespassing." I stopped. The threat of police involvement poured ice water over my burning rage. If I assaulted hospital security, I would be arrested. If I was sitting in a jail cell, Jamal and Beatrice would have unrestricted access to Aaliyah. They would take her home. They would continue the abuse, and I would be locked away, legally branded as a violent, unstable veteran. Beatrice had anticipated my anger and weaponized it perfectly. Beatrice took a slow, deliberate step forward, safely shielded by the 2 large guards. She tilted her head, offering me a cold, victorious smirk. "You see, Kendra, you simply do not belong here. You abandon your child for months at a time to play war games, and then you storm in here demanding answers like you have any right to play mother. Hysterical absentee mothers are a liability to a child's recovery. Jamal and I will ensure Aaliyah gets the best care possible. You are no longer needed." She was baiting me. She wanted me to swing. She wanted me to snap so she could point to my reaction and prove to the world that I was a monster. I locked eyes with my mother-in-law, committing every line of her smug face to memory. I slowly removed my hand from the strap of my bag and let my arms fall to my sides, adopting a posture of absolute submission. I nodded slowly, stepping backward. I turned around and walked toward the exit doors, leaving them standing victorious in the hallway. They thought they had neutralized the threat by kicking me out of the building. They had no idea that throwing a cyber intelligence operative into the shadows was the most dangerous mistake they could possibly make. The heavy glass doors of the intensive care unit closed behind me, shutting out the sterile scent of the hospital and the terrified face of my little girl. I paced the cool, concrete perimeter of the hospital entrance, my tactical boots grinding against the pavement. Dr. Carter had promised to alert law enforcement immediately as a mandatory reporter, but my military training dictated that I control the extraction. I was not going to wait passively for a patrol car. I stood by the emergency loading zone, my hand resting instinctively on the strap of my heavy canvas bag. An unmarked police cruiser pulled up onto the curb before it even shifted fully into park. A man in a rumpled suit stepped out of the driver's side, flashing a gold detective shield clipped to his leather belt. I intercepted him before the automatic doors could slide open. I introduced myself and gave him the exact clinical breakdown of the situation without a single wasted breath. I detailed the spiral fracture that had been healing improperly for over 3 months. I explained the distinct defensive bruising on my daughter's face. I reported that the custodial parent and grandmother were actively obstructing medical staff and attempting to control the narrative. I handed him the facts, like loaded ammunition, expecting him to take the weapon, march up to the second floor, and place my husband in handcuffs. Detective Tyson Rossi listened intently, his brow deeply furrowed as he took rapid notes on a small pad. He gave me a firm nod and gestured for me to lead the way back inside. We rode the elevator in heavy silence. I was fully prepared to watch the steel cuffs close around Jamal's wrists. I was ready to watch the smug arrogance melt off Beatrice's face as the reality of a felony child abuse charge crashed down upon them. I pushed open the glass doors to the VIP waiting room. Jamal was pacing the floor, running his hands over his face in a perfect performance of an anxious, grieving father. Beatrice was still seated comfortably, casually swiping through her phone. When she looked up and saw the detective, she did not panic. Her eyes did not widen. She did not even flinch. Instead, she smiled. Beatrice stood up, smoothing the front of her immaculate ivory suit, and walked toward us, with her arms extended in a warm, familiar greeting. Tyson. "Dear," she said, her honey-sweet voice echoing in the quiet room. "I am so sorry the hospital pulled you away from your family on a weeknight. How is Maria doing? Did the new baby finally overcome that terrible bout of colic?" I watched in absolute horror as the detective's posture entirely shifted. The hardened investigator who had just taken my statement about a battered child melted into a deferential subordinate. Rossi tucked his notepad into his breast pocket and offered my mother-in-law a polite, strained smile. "She is doing much better, councilwoman, thank you for asking." The new formula worked wonders. Beatrice placed a perfectly manicured hand on Rossi's arm, her diamond rings catching the light. "It is an absolute tragedy, Tyson. A simple, horrible bicycle accident. But as you can clearly see, my daughter-in-law has just returned from a highly stressful combat zone. She is suffering from severe deployment fatigue and post-traumatic stress. We are incredibly worried about her mental stability right now. She has been combative with the medical staff and making wild, paranoid accusations against her own family. Jamal is doing his best to keep the peace, but she needs rest and psychiatric intervention, not a police interrogation." The breath left my lungs. I opened my mouth to scream to demand that Rossi look at the x-rays to arrest them right then and there. But Rossi turned to me before I could utter a single word. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something completely unexpected in his gaze. It was not doubt. It was a silent, desperate warning. "Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice projecting an official booming authority for the benefit of the room. "Perhaps we should step out into the hallway to complete your official statement. We need to keep this waiting area clear for other grieving families." Before I could argue or resist, he placed a firm, heavy hand between my shoulder blades and guided me out of the waiting room. We did not stop in the hallway. He marched me past the nurse station and pushed open the heavy reinforced steel door leading to the emergency stairwell. The heavy door clanged shut behind us, plunging us into the harsh, echoing acoustics of the concrete stairwell, isolated from the rest of the building. The moment the door sealed, Rossi dropped his official demeanor. He let out a long, ragged exhale and leaned his shoulders against the cinder-block wall. He looked at me with deep, genuine sympathy. "I am sorry," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I am so damn sorry." I demanded to know why he was apologizing instead of doing his job. I told him the surgeon had physical evidence proving systematic abuse. I told him my daughter was shaking in terror in her hospital bed. I demanded justice. Rossi shook his head, rubbing his temples with his fingertips. "You do not understand how this city works," he told me bluntly. Beatrice Washington sits on the city council. She chairs the police oversight committee. She plays golf with the chief of police every single Sunday morning. She controls the budget for my entire precinct. They have the chief in their pocket. I stared at him, the terrifying reality of his words sinking into my skin. I am a cyber intelligence operative. I deal in hard data, in encrypted facts, in undeniable digital proof. I told him that medical evidence does not care about local political connections. Rossi stepped closer, his face just inches from mine, his expression grim. "If you walk back through those doors right now and make a scene," he warned, "if you push this without bulletproof, undeniable evidence that directly ties them to those specific injuries, she will win. Beatrice will make one phone call to the chief of police. They will classify your entirely justified anger as a veteran PTSD breakdown. They will say you are a danger to yourself and others. They will place you on a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric hold." The words hit me harder than any physical blow I had ever endured in combat training. "If they lock you in a psych ward," Rossi continued relentlessly, "Jamal will get emergency sole legal custody by default. You will not be allowed within 500 feet of your daughter, and they will take her right back to that house the moment she is discharged from this hospital. The system is completely rigged to protect people like Beatrice. You cannot fight her with raw anger. You will lose, and your little girl will pay the ultimate price." My blood ran ice cold. I leaned my back against the heavy steel door, feeling the cold metal seep through my damp combat shirt. I realized in that exact agonizing moment that the law was not going to protect my 6-year-old daughter tonight. The police were compromised. The local administration was compromised. If I acted like a furious, heartbroken mother, I would lose my child forever. To save Aaliyah, I had to stop acting like a mother and start acting like the operative I was trained to be. I had to go completely dark. I nodded slowly to Detective Rossi. I told him I understood the parameters of the battlefield. I told him I would play the game. Just as he reached for the heavy metal door handle to lead us back out to the wolves, a sharp, distinct vibration buzzed against my thigh. I reached into the tactical pocket of my cargo pants and pulled out my heavily encrypted personal device. It was not a secure message from my military command. It was an automated, high-priority financial alert from my secure banking application. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart stopping completely in my chest. A massive transaction had just been successfully initiated. Jamal had just withdrawn $50,000 from our primary joint savings account. The glaring notification on my phone screen felt like a physical blow. $50,000. Drained from our joint savings account in a single transaction while my daughter lay battered in a hospital bed. I shoved the phone into my tactical pocket and pushed through the heavy metal doors of the hospital stairwell out into the attached parking garage. The cold Seattle air hit my face, thick with the smell of exhaust and damp concrete. I needed my encrypted laptop. I needed to tap into the financial servers and see exactly where that money was moving. Detective Rossi had made it perfectly clear that raw anger would only get me locked in a psychiatric ward. I needed digital, undeniable proof. My combat boots echoed sharply in the cavernous, dimly lit structure as I approached my dark gray SUV. I reached for the door handle, but a shadow detached itself from the concrete pillar beside my vehicle. Jamal stepped into the flickering fluorescent light. The transformation was absolute and horrifying. The weeping, exhausted father I had seen in the VIP waiting room was completely gone. In his place stood a man radiating arrogant, untouchable confidence. He had unbuttoned the collar of his tailored shirt and casually slipped his hands into his pockets. A slow, chilling smirk spread across his face as he watched me stop. "Going somewhere, Kendra?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You look a little stressed." Maybe Beatrice was right. Maybe you are having an episode. "Where's the $50,000, Jamal?" I demanded, stepping squarely into his personal space. I kept my voice dead level, suppressing every instinct that screamed at me to wrap my hands around his throat. "And more importantly, what exactly did your mother do to Aaliyah?" Jamal did not flinch. He did not deny the money, and he did not defend his mother. Instead, he let out a short, cold laugh that bounced off the concrete walls. He looked at me as if I were a slow child who had not quite grasped the rules of a game she was already losing. "You have been overseas too long, Kendra," he said, shaking his head slowly. "You have forgotten how the real world operates. You think you can just march in here in your little combat boots, demand answers, and play the hero. It is genuinely pathetic. You are not a hero. You are a liability." I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. The surgeon showed me the scans, Jamal. A spiral fracture. Defensive bruising. "Someone has been systematically abusing my daughter for months, and you let it happen. You covered it up. If you think your mother's political connections are going to save you from a federal child abuse investigation, you are severely underestimating me." Jamal pulled his hands from his pockets and took a step toward me, his height casting a dark shadow over my face. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, calculated malice. "There is no investigation, Kendra," he stated flatly. "And there never will be. Because if you breathe a single word of these delusional abuse allegations to anyone else, I will make sure you never lay eyes on Aaliyah again." I held my ground, staring directly into his cold eyes. "You cannot keep a mother from her child." "Watch me," he whispered viciously. "I have already spoken to my attorneys. The emergency sole custody papers are drafted and ready to be filed first thing Monday morning. Do you have any idea how easy it is going to be to paint you as an unfit mother? You are a private military contractor. You spend 6 to 8 months a year in classified dangerous war zones. You disappear into the shadows, completely uncontactable, while I am here providing a stable, loving routine environment for our daughter." He stepped even closer, his voice turning into a venomous hiss. "My lawyers are going to argue that your highly volatile lifestyle has left you deeply unstable. We will present your behavior in the hospital today as proof of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. A paranoid, aggressive veteran who burst into an intensive care unit wearing combat gear, frightening the staff and traumatizing her already injured child. Who do you think a family court judge is going to believe? A prominent, well-respected local businessman with a spotless record, or an erratic absentee mother who thinks everyone is out to get her? Beatrice has personally endorsed half the family court judges in this district. They will sign the emergency order before you can even hire a lawyer." My blood turned to ice. He had not just allowed the abuse, he had meticulously planned for my reaction. He was weaponizing my service, my career, and my sacrifice to country against me. He knew that the family court system favored stability and continuity, and he had manufactured an entire false reality where he was the savior and I was the threat. "You think I will just walk away?" I said, keeping my face entirely blank, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing my terror. "You think I care about a court order when my daughter is in danger?" Jamal laughed again, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, you will care. Because I am not just taking Aaliyah. I am taking everything. You make an exorbitant amount of money doing your little cyber intelligence missions, Kendra. Hazard pay, combat bonuses, classified operation stipends. When I am granted full legal and physical custody, I will demand maximum child support. I will demand endless alimony to maintain the standard of living Aaliyah is accustomed to." He leaned in, his breath hot against my cheek. "You will spend the rest of your life dodging bullets in the desert just to finance my country club memberships and my mother's political campaigns. You will work until you bleed, and every cent you earn will come directly to me." And if you try to fight it, if you try to bring up a single bruise on Aaliyah's arm, we will have you permanently stripped of your parental rights for bringing false malicious claims against a pillar of the community. We will legally erase you from her life. She will not even remember your name." I stared at the man I had slept next to for 7 years. I searched his eyes for any trace of the person I thought I had married, any flicker of guilt or hesitation. There was absolutely nothing, just a hollow, consuming greed and an entitlement so vast it defied comprehension. Detective Rossi was right. They had built a fortress of privilege and corruption, and they were utterly confident that I could not breach the walls. Jamal took a step back, straightening his shirt collar. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. He believed he had delivered the ultimate checkmate. He thought he had broken the soldier and subjugated the wife. He reached into the pocket of his tailored slacks and pulled out a cheap, scratched plastic keychain attached to a single brass key. He held it up under the flickering fluorescent light, dangling it by a small metal ring. "By the way," he said casually, as if we were discussing the weather, "I had the security company change the locks and the access codes on our house 2 hours ago. My mother felt it was best to secure the property given your current unstable mental state. If you try to enter the neighborhood, the smart security system will automatically flag you as an intruder and dispatch the local police." He tossed the plastic keychain. It hit the concrete at my feet with a sharp clatter. "That is for the Starlight Motel out on Interstate 5, Jamal said, a cruel smile stretching across his face. "It is not exactly the Ritz, but I figured you are used to sleeping in dirt anyway. Do not bother coming back to the hospital tonight. Security has your photo, and they will arrest you on sight. Take a shower, Kendra. Try to get some sleep. You are going to need your energy for the war you are about to lose." Jamal turned his back on me and walked away toward the hospital elevators. I stood alone in the freezing parking garage, listening to the steady click of his expensive shoes on the concrete. I looked down at the cheap motel key resting in the dirt near the tire of my SUV. He truly believed he had won. He truly believed that stripping my access, draining my funds, and threatening me with local corruption was enough to neutralize me. He had forgotten one vital piece of information. I was not just a soldier who followed orders in the dirt. I was a top-tier cyber intelligence defense contractor. I dismantled fortified state-sponsored terror networks for a living. I did not fight with my fists. I fought with data infiltration and absolute digital annihilation. I slowly crouched down and picked up the motel key. The rage inside me cooled from a burning fire into a freezing, calculated focus. Jamal and Beatrice wanted a war. They were about to learn that they had just invited a ghost into their machine. The Starlight Motel smelled of stale bleach and ancient cigarette smoke, but it had an unmonitored Wi-Fi connection and a door I could easily barricade. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I spent the darkest hours of the early morning turning my encrypted laptop into a weapon. I traced the $50,000 Jamal had drained from our accounts, watching it move through a labyrinth of shell LLCs that bore Beatrice's political fingerprints. They were liquidating assets to prepare for a protracted, expensive legal siege in family court. They were building a war chest with my money. I closed the laptop at 3:15 a.m., packed my tactical bag, and slipped out into the freezing Seattle drizzle. It was time to gather the physical intelligence to match the digital footprint. The Pediatric Intensive Care Unit was heavily guarded, but hospital security protocols are designed to deter panicked families, not trained infiltration specialists. I bypassed the main entrances entirely, slipping through the subterranean delivery bays, right as the morning laundry trucks began their rotations. I spoofed a maintenance RFID badge using a proximity scanner I carried in my kit, easily unlocking the service elevators. By 4:20 a.m., the hospital corridors were a ghost town of humming machines and exhausted nurses staring blankly at monitors during the lull of shift change. I moved like a shadow, my steps entirely silent on the linoleum, until I reached Aaliyah's room. I slipped inside and let the heavy door click softly shut, plunging myself into the dim blue-tinted light of the monitors. Aaliyah was heavily sedated, her tiny chest rising and falling in a shallow, rhythmic cadence. The massive, brutal cast encasing her right arm looked completely grotesque against her small frame. I stood over her bed fighting a violent physical wave of nausea. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to scoop her up, tear the IV lines from her hands, and run until we were off the grid. But running would make me a fugitive. It would validate Jamal's fabricated narrative. I had to dismantle their fortress from the inside, and to do that I needed hard evidence. I pulled a pair of black nitrile gloves from my cargo pocket and snapped them over my hands. I moved to the plastic bedside cabinet, where the trauma nurses typically stored a patient's personal effects upon admission. I pulled open the bottom drawer and found exactly what I was looking for. A clear plastic hospital bag containing the clothes Aaliyah had been wearing when the ambulance arrived. I unsealed the bag and carefully laid the garments out on the small visitor's table, illuminating them with a narrow beam from my penlight. The pink cotton t-shirt was stiff with dried, rusted blood around the collar. The left sleeve was violently torn at the seam. I ran my gloved fingers along the fabric, matching the location of the tear to the exact position of the spiral fracture Dr. Carter had shown me on the X-rays. A bicycle fall does not rip the fabric of a shirt in a twisting upward motion. Someone had grabbed my daughter by the sleeve and wrenched her arm until the bones snapped. I pulled a sterile evidence bag from my kit and methodically packed the shirt inside, documenting the tear and the blood spatter with the high-resolution encrypted camera on my phone. The door handle suddenly rattled. I froze my hand hovering over the evidence bag. I smoothly slid my penlight into my pocket and shifted my weight, preparing to neutralize a security guard. The door pushed open, spilling the harsh yellow light of the hallway into the quiet room. It was not a nurse. It was not security. Harper. My sister-in-law stepped into the room. She was wearing a perfectly matched pale gray cashmere lounge set, holding a massive iced matcha latte in one hand and a bundle of plastic-wrapped dry cleaning in the other. Her platinum blonde hair was swept up into a messy bun that undoubtedly cost hundreds of dollars to maintain. She kicked the door shut behind her with the heel of her designer sneaker, completely oblivious to the gravity of the intensive care unit. Harper stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing in the shadows. She nearly dropped her overpriced coffee, her eyes widening in genuine shock. "What are you doing in here?" Harper demanded, her voice an entirely inappropriate piercing hiss. "Jamal specifically said he had you locked out of the house and flagged by hospital security. You are not supposed to be in this building." "I am her mother," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously flat and even. I did not move. I let the silence stretch, knowing that operatives use silence to force their targets to fill the void with intelligence. Harper scoffed, rolling her eyes as she tossed Beatrice's dry cleaning onto the vinyl sofa. "Biologically sure," she muttered, taking a loud sip of her drink. "But let us be real, Kendra. You abandon this family for months at a time to go play soldier in the sandbox. You leave Jamal to manage everything single-handedly. You honestly have no right to march in here and play the tragic devoted mother when things get a little messy." I watched her analyzing her micro-expressions. She was not visiting to check on a critically injured child. She had not brought a balloon, a stuffed animal, or a word of comfort. She had been dispatched to act as a courier for Beatrice's wardrobe, treating the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit like a convenient drop-off location before her morning Pilates class. "You should actually be on your knees feeling grateful." Harper continued pacing the small room, her expensive sneakers squeaking on the floor. "Beatrice completely rearranged her political schedule to step in and raise Aaliyah while you were off chasing adrenaline. Beatrice practically moved into your house. Do you have any idea how much stress this little accident has caused my mother-in-law? The press is sniffing around. Beatrice is launching a massive mayoral campaign next quarter, and the last thing she needs is the optics of a Child Protective Services inquiry because you cannot control your emotions." I kept my hands resting loosely at my sides. "Beatrice moved into my house," I repeated, ensuring I memorized the timeline Harper was so freely offering. "Of course she did," Harper snapped, looking at me like I was profoundly stupid. Jamal was overwhelmed. "And let us be brutally honest, Kendra. Jamal's family has a certain prominent standing in this city. They have a legacy to uphold. And Aaliyah, well, she is a handful. She is loud, she is clumsy, and she is incredibly hyperactive. Harper leaned against the wall, swirling the green ice in her cup, her privilege radiating off her in toxic waves. You know how it is. Jamal and Beatrice always say that black children, especially the difficult ones, need strict, unyielding discipline so they do not become statistics. It is just their culture, and Beatrice knows best. She was doing you a massive favor by instilling some actual structure into that house. If Aaliyah was not constantly running wild and disobeying orders, she would not have taken that tumble off her bike. You cannot blame Beatrice for a clumsy, hyperactive kid getting what was coming to her. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her casual racism and victim blaming echoed in the quiet room. Harper, wrapped in her insulated, wealthy white privilege, was eagerly parroting Beatrice's horrific justifications for child abuse. They had convinced themselves that breaking a 6-year-old's arm was simply an act of strict cultural discipline. I did not take the bait. I did not scream. I did not react. I simply turned my back on Harper and reached into the plastic hospital bag to retrieve the last of Aaliyah's belongings. I pulled out her small, scuffed canvas sneakers. Harper sighed loudly behind me, clearly bored that her monologue had not provoked a screaming match she could later report to Beatrice. Whatever, Kendra. Just do not be here when Beatrice arrives at 7. She is bringing the hospital director and she will absolutely have you arrested this time. Harper picked up her coffee, gave her reflection a quick, admiring glance in the dark monitor screen, and slipped out the door, leaving me alone in the dim light. I let out a long, slow breath, pushing the burning rage back down into a locked compartment in my mind. I picked up the left sneaker to drop it into the evidence bag. As my thumb brushed the inside of the canvas, I felt something stiff and irregular wedged deep into the toe box. I paused. I slid 2 fingers past the loosened laces and pulled. It was a crumpled, folded piece of thick construction paper. It had been shoved down into the shoe with frantic, desperate force. I carefully smoothed the paper out on the table, clicking my pen light back on to illuminate the page. It was a drawing executed in the heavy, chaotic, terrified strokes of a wax crayon. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I stared at the crude image. It depicted 2 stick figures. One was small-colored in brown, tumbling head over heels down a series of jagged, sharp black lines that clearly represented a steep flight of stairs. Standing at the top of the stairs was a much larger figure. The large figure had yellow scribbles for hair and, drawn with deliberate, unmistakable detail, a thick circle of white dots wrapped tightly around its neck. A pearl necklace, Beatrice's signature pearl necklace. I stared at the crude, terrifying image on the heavy construction paper. The yellow scribbles for hair. The distinct white dotted circle wrapping the neck of the larger figure. Beatrice's signature pearl necklace. The jagged, violent black lines representing the steep staircase, and the tiny brown stick figure tumbling down into the void. Aaliyah could not verbally articulate her nightmare to the doctors, so she had drawn it, folded it into a tiny square, and hidden it in the one place she thought no one would look. Her shoe. My hands, which had remained perfectly steady while disarming explosive ordnance in active war zones, began to violently tremble. The clinical, detached, operative mindset I relied on to survive threatened to shatter completely. My mother-in-law had pushed my 6-year-old daughter down a flight of stairs, breaking her arm and fracturing her ribs. And my husband, the man who had sworn to protect us, had covered it up, locked me out of my own home, and drained $50,000 from our accounts to fund a legal war against me. I took a deep, jagged breath, inhaling the sterile scent of the hospital room. I carefully folded the drawing back along its original creases and slid it into the clear plastic evidence bag alongside the bloody, torn t-shirt. I sealed the bag, pressing the plastic zip tight, and slipped it deep into the concealed inner pocket of my tactical cargo pants. I needed access to my home network. I needed my encrypted laptop. I needed to follow the digital trail of that $50,000 and uncover every single communication between Jamal, Beatrice, and whatever corrupt local officials they had on their payroll. I could not do that from the parking lot of a cheap motel on the interstate. I needed the keys to my house, and I was going to have to sacrifice every ounce of my pride to get them. I closed my eyes and engaged a mental technique I had learned during advanced interrogation resistance training. I visualized a heavy steel vault in my mind. I took the burning, suffocating rage, the maternal terror, and the absolute hatred I felt for my husband and his mother, and I locked it all inside that vault. I spun the combination dial. What remained on the outside was a blank slate. I walked over to the small sink in the corner of Aaliyah's room. I turned on the cold water and splashed it aggressively onto my face, deliberately smearing the dust and sweat I had accumulated during my 30 hours of international transit. I rubbed my eyes roughly with the heels of my hands until the sclera were injected with blood, and the skin around them was red and puffy. I messed up my tightly secured hair, allowing loose strands to fall wildly around my face. I altered my posture, dropping my squared military shoulders, allowing my spine to curve into a slump of utter defeat. I forced my breathing to become shallow, rapid, and erratic. I walked back down the long, windowless corridor, not with the heavy rhythmic thud of combat boots, but with a dragging, hesitant shuffle. I reached the heavy glass double doors of the VIP family waiting area and paused. I could see them through the glass. Jamal was standing by the gourmet coffee station checking his luxury watch. Beatrice was seated in her plush leather armchair, her posture perfect, speaking softly to someone on her cell phone. They looked like a picture of wealthy suburban concern. I pushed the glass doors open. The heavy metal latch clicked, and Jamal's head snapped up. He immediately stiffened, his jaw clenching as he prepared for another confrontation. He took a step forward, his chest puffed out, ready to signal security. Beatrice ended her phone call and narrowed her eyes, her lips pressing into a thin line of absolute disdain. I did not yell. I did not demand answers. Instead, I let my knees buckle just slightly. I leaned heavily against the glass doorframe, wrapping my arms around my own stomach, as if trying to hold myself together. I buried my face in my hands, and I forced a broken, agonizing sob from the back of my throat. Jamal stopped dead in his tracks. The aggressive posture melted away into utter confusion. "I am so sorry," I gasped, my voice cracking perfectly. I dropped my hands from my face, looking at Jamal with wide, tear-filled, desperate eyes. "I am so sorry, Jamal. You were right. You were both completely right." The silence in the waiting room was absolute. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Beatrice slowly lowered her cell phone to her lap, her eyes narrowing suspiciously, analyzing this sudden shift. "Kendra," Jamal said cautiously, glancing over his shoulder at his mother before looking back at me. "What are you doing?" I stumbled forward, closing the distance between us, letting my hands shake visibly as I reached out to grasp the sleeve of his tailored shirt. "I am losing my mind, Jamal," I wept, letting the tears spill over my eyelashes and run down my cheeks. I just stepped off the transport plane. I have not slept in 3 days. The noise, the lights, the stress of the deployment. It just broke me. I walked into the hospital and I panicked. I saw the cast and the bruises, and my brain just snapped back to the combat zone. I was seeing enemies where there were none. I brought the war home. I turned my tear-streaked face toward Beatrice. She was sitting perfectly still, absorbing every word, her ego feeding on my public humiliation. "Beatrice, I am so deeply sorry," I pleaded, letting my voice waver into a pathetic, begging tone. "Harper came into the room earlier, and she explained everything to me. She told me how you stepped in when Jamal was overwhelmed. She told me how you rearranged your entire political schedule to move into the house and care for Aaliyah while I was gone. I abandoned my family to go overseas, and you held it all together. And I repaid you by marching in here and making psychotic accusations. I was paranoid. I was delusional. Please, please forgive me." Jamal's chest visibly expanded. The arrogant, dominating patriarch had returned in full force. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a sickening mixture of pity and triumph. He genuinely believed his parking garage threats had broken me. He believed that the reality of losing my daughter and my income had shattered my spirit and forced me into submissive compliance. "You see, Mother," Jamal said, turning to Beatrice with a smug, knowing smile. "I told you she was just suffering from deployment fatigue. She is unstable, but she is finally recognizing it." Beatrice stood up. She walked slowly across the hardwood floor, her heels clicking softly. She stopped right in front of me, looking down her nose at my dust-covered uniform and my tear-stained face. She did not offer a comforting touch. She simply basked in her absolute superiority. "Mental instability is a very serious matter," Kendra Beatrice said, her voice dripping with maternal condescension. "You caused a horrific scene today. You threatened the reputation of this family, and you severely complicated my granddaughter's recovery. However, we are a Christian family. We believe in grace. We understand that your line of work is highly damaging to the female psyche. You clearly cannot handle the stress of motherhood and military contracting simultaneously." I nodded frantically, swiping at my eyes. I know I need help. Please, Jamal, I just want to go home. The Starlight Motel is terrifying. I just want to sleep in my own bed. I will not cause any more trouble, I promise. I will stay out of your way. I will do whatever you say. Please do not take Aaliyah away from me." Jamal scoffed, running the hand over his perfectly styled hair. He looked at his mother, communicating entirely through a silent, arrogant exchange of glances. They were evaluating the tactical advantage of my request. A hysterical, paranoid wife roaming the city in a cheap motel might attract unwanted police attention or talk to the wrong hospital staff. A broken, compliant wife locked safely inside the family home in the suburbs was contained. She was controllable. "Let her go to the house," Jamal Beatrice finally decreed, waving her hand dismissively. "She smells like an airplane hangar, and she is making a spectacle of herself. Let her go home, clean up, and sleep off this psychotic episode." Jamal nodded in agreement. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, his thumb tapping across the screen. "I am deactivating the emergency lockdown on the security system," he said, his tone authoritative. "I am unlocking the front door. But listen to me very carefully, Kendra. I am staying at my mother's estate tonight. It is closer to the hospital, and I need to be here first thing in the morning to consult with the surgeons. You will stay at the house. You will not come back to this hospital until I specifically give you permission. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed submissively on the floor. "Thank you, Jamal. Thank you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key to our front door. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it casually through the air. I caught it against my chest, gripping the cold metal tightly in my palm. "Go home, Kendra," Jamal sneered, turning his back on me to return to the coffee station. "Try to act like a normal human being for once." I backed out of the waiting room, nodding meekly at Beatrice, who had already returned to scrolling on her phone, entirely dismissing my existence. I kept my head down and my shoulders slumped as I shuffled back down the hallway, through the double doors and into the waiting elevator. The heavy metal doors slid shut, cutting me off from the intensive care unit. The moment the elevator car began its descent, the tears instantly stopped. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back until they cracked in the quiet space. I wiped the moisture from my face with the back of my tactical sleeve. My breathing slowed, returning to a deep, controlled, operational rhythm. I looked down at the brass key resting in the palm of my hand. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Their blinding arrogance and desperate need for supremacy had just handed me the keys to the castle. They thought they had sent a broken, hysterical woman home to cry herself to sleep. They had actually just granted a digital forensics expert unrestricted, unmonitored access to the very network they were using to orchestrate their crimes. The performance was over. The infiltration had officially begun. The ride back to the neighborhood was a blur of gray skies and driving rain. I parked my SUV 2 blocks away from our pristine, manicured street, keeping a low profile. Jamal had proudly announced that he had unlocked the front door remotely, but I knew his game. Our smart home security system was rigged with high-definition interior cameras, motion sensors, and audio recording devices. He wanted to sit in his mother's lavish estate and watch the live feed on his phone. He wanted to monitor his defeated, hysterical wife as she paced the living room and cried herself to sleep. I approached the property through the dense tree line bordering the back patio. The first thing I did was pull a small military-grade electromagnetic pulse generator from my tactical bag. I pressed the heavy metallic cylinder against the exterior junction box of the smart home system and triggered the device. A soft, muffled pop echoed in the damp morning air. The glowing blue ring on the security keypad instantly went dark. The entire surveillance grid was completely blind. To Jamal, the application on his phone would simply show a frozen frame, a common network timeout error. I unlocked the back door with the heavy brass key and stepped inside. The silence of the house hit me like a physical blow. There were no brightly colored toys scattered across the living room rug. There was no sound of Aaliyah's favorite morning cartoons playing in the background. The air felt sterile cold and entirely devoid of life. I walked into the kitchen and dropped my heavy canvas bag onto the granite island. I rolled my shoulders, letting the terrified, weeping, submissive persona slide off me completely. The broken mother was gone. I was back in the combat zone. I moved directly to the basement. Behind a false wall panel near the water heater, I kept a reinforced steel biometric safe that Jamal did not even know existed. I punched in my access code, pressed my thumb to the scanner, and pulled out a shock-proof black case containing my dedicated infiltration hardware. This was not commercial technology. This was a military processing array equipped with localized server bypass nodes, deep web decryption keys, and untraceable satellite uplinks. I hauled the heavy case up to the dining room table, cracked it open, and booted the primary array. The cooling fans whirred to life with a quiet, aggressive hum. Jamal truly believed he was a mastermind because he hired an expensive local IT firm to secure his home office network. He thought setting up dual-factor authentication and a basic corporate firewall made him invincible. I connected a hardline directly into the primary wall port and ran a brute force decryption protocol. It took my system exactly 47 seconds to shatter Jamal's administrative defenses. I was completely inside the nervous system of his entire digital life. I started by hunting down the $50,000. I pulled the routing numbers from the emergency banking alert I had received at the hospital and tracked the destination node. The money had bounced through 3 different offshore holding accounts before landing in a corporate trust registered to Beatrice. But as I peeled back the layers of that specific trust, slicing through the shell companies she used for her political campaigns, a much larger, darker picture began to emerge. The $50,000 was just a drop in the bucket. I initiated a comprehensive forensic audit of our joint finances, spanning the last 4 years. I watched columns of green and white data cascade across my black screen, highlighting massive discrepancies in bright red. I felt my jaw tighten as the total embezzled amount climbed higher and higher. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were missing. My hazard pay, my classified operation stipends, the blood money I earned dodging mortar fire in hostile territories to secure my daughter's future. It had been systematically and quietly siphoned away into a web of invisible accounts while I was deployed. I isolated the monthly transfers labeled as Aaliyah's educational expenses. For the past 2 years, Jamal had told me he enrolled her in an elite private after-school conservatory. He had emailed me glossy brochures detailing their advanced reading programs, their classical piano lessons, and their specialized childhood development professionals. He claimed the tuition was exorbitant, but absolutely necessary for her growth, using it as a justification for me to take on longer, more dangerous contracts overseas. I cross-referenced the conservatory's billing department with Jamal's outbound wire transfers. He had never made a single payment to that school. Aaliyah had never been enrolled. Instead of receiving premium care and education, my daughter was being dropped off at Beatrice's house every single afternoon. She was being locked in that sprawling, immaculate mansion with a woman who demanded absolute silence and perfect compliance. Aaliyah was not hyperactive. She was not clumsy. She was a normal, vibrant 6-year-old child trapped in a house of horrors, enduring systematic abuse, while her father stole the money meant to protect and nurture her. The fury burned hot and bright in my chest, a suffocating inferno of maternal rage, but I channeled every ounce of it directly into the keyboard. I needed to know exactly what my sacrifice was funding. I wrote a custom tracking script to follow the embezzled hazard payout of Beatrice's corporate trust and into its final resting places. The money split into two distinct streams. I followed the first stream down a complex digital rabbit hole of decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges and heavily masked international wire transfers. The trail led directly to a series of offshore betting syndicates and high-stakes underground gambling rings. I pulled the ledgers and decrypted the account identities. Jamal was not the brilliant, calculating, prominent local businessman he portrayed to the world. He was a degenerate, desperate gambling addict. He was bleeding cash at an astonishing rate, placing catastrophic bets on illegal sportsbooks and unregulated offshore casinos. He was racking up debts that would have completely ruined his pristine reputation and permanently destroyed Beatrice's upcoming mayoral campaign. They were using my life savings, my combat pay, to cover his massive, humiliating losses. He had sold out his own daughter's safety to pay off criminal bookies. I took a slow, steady breath and clicked on the second stream of stolen funds. This money moved much closer to home. It bypassed the gambling syndicates and funneled directly into a commercial property management firm right here in downtown Seattle. I hacked into the management firm's database and pulled the lease agreements and the corporate ownership records for the destination account. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my throat as the name of the business populated on my screen. The money was pouring into a luxury fashion boutique located in the highest rent shopping district in the city. The sole proprietor listed on the corporate charter was Harper, my sister-in-law, who had just stood in a Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, wearing cashmere loungewear, lecturing me about my failures as a mother and aggressively defending Beatrice's abuse. Her exclusive, pretentious boutique was functionally bankrupt. I pulled her profit and loss statements. The store had not turned a legitimate profit in over 3 years. Harper was a terrible business owner drowning in commercial debt, ordering inventory she could not sell, and maintaining a storefront she could not afford. Beatrice was artificially keeping the boutique afloat using my stolen hazard pay. Harper's entire identity, her arrogant superiority, her lavish designer lifestyle, was entirely funded by the soldier she so deeply despised. Every time she looked down her nose at me, she was standing in shoes paid for by my sweat and blood. They thought they had neutralized me. They thought stripping me of my access, draining my immediate accounts, and threatening me with local corruption would leave me helpless and compliant. Jamal thought locking me in this house would keep me contained. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded weapon to a ghost. I downloaded every ledger, every wire transfer, and every hidden communication onto an encrypted flash drive. They wanted a war in family court. I was going to give them an absolute massacre. The progress bar on my decryption software hit 100%, confirming the successful transfer of every stolen financial record onto my encrypted flash drive. I had just initiated the secure unmount sequence when the sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels against the entryway hardwood shattered the silence of the house. I had a fraction of a second to react. I yanked the drive from the port, slammed the reinforced lid of my server case shut, and kicked the heavy black box deep into the shadows beneath the mahogany dining table. I grabbed a damp rag and a bottle of surface cleaner from the kitchen counter, immediately dropping to my knees on the cold tile. By the time the intruder rounded the corner, I was furiously scrubbing an invisible stain. My shoulders hunched, my breathing ragged. I was playing the exact role they expected to see. A broken, frantic woman trying to scrub away her failures. Harper stood in the archway of the kitchen. She had changed out of her hospital loungewear and into a sharp, tailored blazer holding a leather tote bag that cost more than my first vehicle. She looked around my home with absolute disdain, her nose wrinkled, as if the very air inside my house was offensive to her. She did not knock. She did not announce herself. She had simply used her own spare key, possessing the space and wielding her entitlement like a physical weapon. "Get up!" Harper commanded, her voice slicing through the quiet room. "Stop pretending you are actually cleaning. It is pathetic." I kept my head bowed. my hands trembling deliberately as I gripped the rag. "What are you doing here, Harper?" I asked, forcing my voice to waver. "Jamal said I was supposed to be left alone." Jamal sent me to collect his physical hard drives from the home office, she stated, stepping fully into the kitchen and towering over me. "Beatrice wants all his business files secured at her estate before your unpredictable mood swings cause you to smash his equipment. So you are going to walk upstairs, unlock his office, and hand them over to me right now." I slowly stood up, keeping my posture entirely submissive. I shrank back against the kitchen counter, wrapping my arms around my waist. "I do not have the code to his office," I lied smoothly. "He changed it when he locked me out." Harper let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She closed the distance between us, stepping squarely into my personal space. "You are lying, Kendra. You always lie to make yourself look like the victim. I am not leaving this house without those drives. Do you understand me? If you do not hand them over right this second, I will pull my phone out and dial dispatch." She smiled, a cold, predatory stretching of her lips. "I will tell the police that I came to collect my brother-in-law's belongings, and I feel physically threatened by a highly trained, mentally unstable military contractor who broke into the property. I will tell them you are acting aggressive and erratic. Do you know how quickly the police will respond to a wealthy white woman claiming she is in danger in this neighborhood? Who do you think they are going to believe? The respected boutique owner, or the aggressive absentee black mother who already caused a psychotic scene at the hospital this morning? They will have you in handcuffs before you can even explain yourself, and Beatrice will make sure the arrest is leaked directly to the family court judge." She was weaponizing her racial privilege with breathtaking ease, fully aware of the lethal dynamic she was invoking. She wanted me terrified. She wanted me paralyzed by the very real threat of police intervention. I let my chest heave, feigning absolute paralyzing panic. As I raised my hands in a gesture of total surrender, I slipped my right hand into the cargo pocket of my pants. My thumb found the side button on my smartphone. I pressed it twice in rapid succession, silently activating the hidden audio recording application I had configured years ago for field operations. "Please," I begged, letting my voice crack with manufactured desperation. "Please do not call them Harper. I will give you whatever you want. I just need to understand. I just need to know why. Why did Beatrice have to break her arm? Aaliyah is just a little girl. She is your niece. How could you let her do that?" Harper rolled her eyes, completely unfazed by my tears. The arrogance radiating from her was blinding. She loved this. She loved holding all the power, and she loved hearing herself talk. She stepped back, crossing her arms over her chest, eager to lecture me on my own failures. "You are so dramatic," Kendra Harper sneered. "Beatrice did not set out to break her arm. She was simply enforcing boundaries that you completely failed to establish. Aaliyah is defiant. She is disrespectful. From the moment Jamal dropped her off at Beatrice's house, she was a nightmare. She spent every single afternoon throwing massive tantrums. She would stand by the front door and scream for you. She would not stop crying for you. It was completely unacceptable behavior for a child in Beatrice's home. I kept my face buried in my hands, silently recording every single syllable. "You do not hurt a child for crying," I sobbed. "You discipline a child who refuses to submit to authority," Harper corrected viciously. "Do you have any idea how disruptive it is to have a child screaming for a mother who is halfway across the world dodging bullets?" Beatrice had to show her who was actually in charge. She had to break that defiance. Beatrice had to lock her in the basement just to get some peace and quiet. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Harper did not notice my sudden stillness. She was too caught up in her own self-righteous momentum. Hours down there in the dark, Harper continued, waving her hand dismissively. Hours in that unfinished storage room, and she still would not learn her lesson. When Beatrice opened the door to let her out, Aaliyah tried to run. She tried to push past Beatrice to get to the front door. Beatrice simply grabbed her arm to stop her from running away, and the little brat twisted away so hard she snapped her own bone. If she had just obeyed orders, she would not be in a hospital bed right now. It is her own fault, Kendra. And it is your fault for raising such a wild, disobedient child. She had locked my terrified 6-year-old daughter in a pitch-black basement for hours, simply because she was crying for her mother. And when Aaliyah finally tried to escape the darkness, Beatrice had wrenched her arm until the bone shattered. Now Harper demanded her voice, snapping me back to the present. "You are going to take me to the office, and you are going to give me those hard drives, or I am making that phone call." I nodded meekly, keeping my head down so she could not see the lethal focus burning in my eyes. I led her upstairs to Jamal's office. I bypassed the keypad entirely, pulling a master override key from the top of the door frame that Jamal always forgot was there. I opened the door and pointed to a stack of silver external hard drives sitting on his desk. They were dummy drives. They contained nothing but thousands of corrupted movie files and blank spreadsheets decoys I had set up years ago when I first realized Jamal was overly protective of his home office. Harper snatched them off the desk, shoving them unceremoniously into her expensive tote bag. She turned to me, her face flushed with victory. "Stay out of our way, Kendra," she warned, her voice dripping with venom. "You have lost. Jamal is taking full custody, and Beatrice is going to make sure you never see a dime of his money. Just sign the divorce papers when the lawyers send them, and maybe we will let you see Aaliyah on alternating holidays." I stood silently in the hallway, watching her march down the stairs and out the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind her. I waited until I heard the engine of her luxury SUV roar to life and the tires roll out of the driveway. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I stopped the recording and immediately uploaded the encrypted audio file to 3 separate offshore servers. Harper had just confessed to false imprisonment, child abuse, and the systematic cover-up of severe physical trauma. The audio was damning, but in family court, audio recordings can be challenged. Lawyers can argue context. They can claim the conversation was hypothetical or coerced. I needed visual confirmation. I needed the undeniable, irrefutable truth. I walked downstairs and stood in front of the main smart home security panel mounted on the living room wall. Jamal was arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. I knew he had accessed the administrative controls and wiped the local digital video recorders the moment Aaliyah was taken to the hospital. He had formatted the hard drives, permanently erasing the local footage of Beatrice dragging my daughter down the hallway and locking her in the basement. He thought he had scrubbed the timeline clean. He thought the evidence no longer existed. But Jamal did not understand the architecture of the network he was using. He had hired a commercial IT firm to install the cameras, but he had forced me to configure the back-end routing because he did not want to pay their exorbitant hourly setup fees. When I configured the system, I did not just link the cameras to the local DVR. I built a hidden shadow partition. I wrote a script that continuously mirrored every single frame of video data to a secure compartmentalized cloud bucket hosted on Amazon Web Services. The cloud partition did not show up on the consumer-facing application on Jamal's phone. It was completely invisible to anyone who did not possess the specific command line encryption keys. I sat down at the dining room table, pulled my military server case back out from the shadows, and booted the console. I bypassed the local network and established a direct encrypted tunnel to my hidden cloud storage. I typed in the 32-character alphanumeric decryption string. The screen blinked and a massive directory of time-stamped video files populated in front of me. Every camera in the house, every angle, every single second of the last 6 months preserved in high definition. I isolated the exterior and interior cameras covering the dates I had been deployed. I found the timeline Harper had just handed me. I clicked on the file labeled Basement Stairwell, hit play, and prepared to watch the monsters in my house burn their own kingdom to the ground. The video file buffered for a fraction of a second before rendering in crystal clear 4K resolution on my monitor. The timestamp in the bottom right corner read October 12th, 2:14 p.m. It was exactly 2 weeks after my deployment had begun. I sat alone in the silent dining room, the blue glow of the monitor casting long shadows against the walls. I synced the audio stream from the hidden microphone array I had embedded in the living room crown molding. The quiet hum of the house filled my headphones. On the screen, my 6-year-old daughter was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug. She had a box of crayons spread out around her, humming a soft, tuneless melody as she colored in a sketchbook. She looked so small, so entirely innocent. Beatrice walked into the frame. She was wearing her usual immaculate country club attire, her signature pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. She stopped in the center of the room and looked down at Aaliyah with an expression of profound, naked disgust. "Get those childish scribbles off my expensive rug!" Beatrice snapped, her voice sharp and grating through the high-definition audio feed. "You are making a mess! You are always making a mess!" Aaliyah scrambled to her feet, her tiny hands hurriedly scooping up the crayons. "I am sorry, Grandma," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I was just making a picture for my mommy for when she comes home." Beatrice snatched the sketchbook directly out of Aaliyah's hands. She did not even look at the drawing. She ripped the page from the spiral binding, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it into the nearest wastebasket. "Your mother is not coming home anytime soon," Beatrice stated coldly. "She abandoned you because you are a difficult, disobedient child. Now go to your room and do not come out until I tell you to." I watched my daughter's face crumple. She did not argue. She simply turned and walked slowly up the stairs, her head bowed in total defeat. I did not scream. I did not smash my fist into the keyboard. I compartmentalized the burning, suffocating pain in my chest, locking it away behind years of military psychological training. I was an operative processing enemy intelligence. I needed the full scope of the operational timeline. I began clicking through the catalog of deleted files, jumping forward day by day, systematically documenting the nightmare my daughter had endured. The emotional abuse was constant, methodical, and entirely unprovoked. I watched Beatrice criticize Aaliyah's eating habits, slapping a fork out of her hand at the dinner table because she chewed too loudly. I watched Beatrice systematically pack up every single toy I had ever bought my daughter and shove them into black garbage bags, telling Aaliyah that she did not deserve nice things until she learned respect. Then I found the file from October 22nd, the day Harper had so arrogantly mentioned. The camera angle showed the main hallway leading to the basement door. Aaliyah was standing in the hall, crying softly, clutching a small, worn-out photograph of me in my uniform. Beatrice marched into the frame, her face contorted with rage. She grabbed Aaliyah by the upper arm, her manicured fingers digging into the child's skin with enough force to leave deep purple bruises. "Stop your pathetic whining," Beatrice hissed, dragging my struggling daughter down the hallway. Beatrice yanked open the heavy oak door leading down to the unfinished, windowless basement. Aaliyah screamed, dropping the photograph as she tried to pull away. "Please, Grandma, no. It is dark down there. Please, I am sorry." Beatrice shoved her roughly into the stairwell. The door slammed shut with a sickening thud. The deadbolt clicked into place. I switched the camera feed to the infrared night vision lens in the basement. I sat in my silent dining room and watched my daughter huddle in the pitch-black darkness on the cold concrete floor. I watched her pull her knees to her chest and rock back and forth, sobbing uncontrollably. She stayed down there for 3 hours and 14 minutes. Up in the living room, camera 2 showed Beatrice calmly drinking a glass of Chardonnay and watching a daytime talk show, completely unbothered by the terror she was inflicting below her feet. My fingernails dug into the palms of my hands until the skin broke. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I had seen enough of the preamble. I needed the final undeniable strike. I jumped the timeline forward to the day of the hospital admission. Tuesday, November 4th, 3:42 p.m. I synced the primary hallway camera with the lens positioned at the top of the main hardwood staircase. The afternoon sun was streaming through the skylight. Aaliyah was walking down the hallway toward her bedroom. She was holding a tall plastic cup filled with dark red cranberry juice. She was walking carefully, her eyes focused intently on the liquid, trying her hardest not to spill a single drop. Beatrice suddenly turned the corner, walking briskly from the master suite. She was on her cell phone, distracted and visibly irritated. She bumped directly into Aaliyah. The plastic cup slipped from Aaliyah's small hands. It hit the hardwood floor, sending a splash of dark red juice across the pristine cream-colored runner rug. Beatrice froze. She lowered her cell phone, staring at the spreading red stain. Aaliyah immediately dropped to her knees, her hands frantically trying to wipe up the liquid with the sleeves of her pink cotton t-shirt. "I am sorry. I am sorry," Aaliyah cried, her voice escalating into sheer panic. "I will clean it up." Beatrice's face morphed into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She did not yell, she did not scold, she simply stepped forward, raised her right hand, and delivered a brutal sweeping backhand strike directly across Aaliyah's face. The force of the blow lifted my daughter off her knees. Aaliyah stumbled backward, her small feet tangling in the edge of the ruined rug. She was standing barely 2 feet from the edge of the steep, polished hardwood staircase. She lost her balance. Her arms flailed wildly, desperate to find a handrail that was too far out of reach. I stopped breathing. I sat paralyzed in my chair as I watched my child fall backward into the empty space. She tumbled down the jagged wooden steps. The high-definition microphone captured the horrifying hollow sound of her small body impacting the hard edges. She hit the bottom landing with a final sickening thud. Then there was only silence. Aaliyah did not cry. She lay completely motionless at the bottom of the stairs, her right arm bent at a horrific, unnatural angle beneath her torso. On the camera above, Beatrice stood at the edge of the stairs. She looked down at the broken child. She did not gasp. She did not reach for her phone to dial emergency services. She simply reached up and calmly adjusted the pearl necklace resting against her collarbone. I checked the timestamp. It was 3:44 p.m. I fast-forwarded the footage exactly 4 minutes. At 3:48 p.m., the front door chimed and unlocked. Jamal walked into the foyer carrying his leather briefcase and a cup of artisan coffee. He stepped out of his shoes, turned the corner, and stopped. He saw his daughter lying unconscious at the bottom of the stairs. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Call an ambulance," I whispered to the screen, begging the digital ghost of my husband to show a single shred of humanity. "Be a father. Save her." Jamal dropped his briefcase. He rushed to Aaliyah's side and crouched down. He pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck, checking her pulse. He let out a long, visible sigh of relief when he found one. He did not pull out his phone. He stood up and looked at the top of the stairs, spotting his mother standing near the spilled juice. "What did you do?" Jamal demanded, his voice low and tight. "She tripped." Beatrice replied smoothly, her tone entirely devoid of panic. "She made a mess and she tripped while running away from the consequences." Jamal looked back down at the blood pooling from the scrape on Aaliyah's forehead. He looked at the violently fractured arm. He was a corporate executive who dealt in liability and crisis management. I watched his mind calculate the catastrophic fallout of a child abuse investigation. I watched him weigh the life of his daughter against the pristine reputation of his family name. His family name won. "Get a towel," Jamal ordered his mother, his voice shifting into a cold operational cadence. "Wipe the handrail. Wipe the top step. Get the bleach spray from the kitchen and neutralize that juice stain." Jamal stepped carefully over his unconscious daughter. He walked straight past her, opened the door leading to the attached garage, and disappeared inside. He returned 30 seconds later, dragging Aaliyah's pink bicycle by the handlebars. He threw the bicycle roughly onto the floor near the bottom of the stairs, deliberately positioning it so the front wheel rested near Aaliyah's broken arm. He walked into the kitchen, grabbed a roll of paper towels, and began methodically wiping away the droplets of blood that had splattered onto the baseboards. He was destroying a crime scene. He was orchestrating a massive calculated cover-up while his child lay bleeding on the floor. I watched the timestamp: 3:55 p.m., 4:02 p.m., 4:09 p.m. They took 23 minutes to clean the scene, 23 agonizing minutes where Aaliyah received absolutely no medical intervention. Only when the floor was spotless, the bicycle perfectly staged, and Beatrice's hands thoroughly washed, did Jamal finally pull his smartphone from his pocket. He took a deep breath, ruffled his own hair to look frantic, and dialed 911. My daughter fell off her bike inside the house. Jamal yelled into the phone, his voice a perfect Oscar-worthy imitation of a panicked father. She hit the stairs. "There is so much blood. Please, you have to send an ambulance." I hit the pause button. The screen froze on Jamal's face as he crouched next to Aaliyah, playing the role of the terrified savior for the emergency dispatcher. A violent physical wave of nausea crashed over me. I shoved my chair back, scrambled away from the table, and barely reached the kitchen sink before my stomach violently expelled nothing but bitter bile and stomach acid. I gripped the cold porcelain edges of the sink, my knuckles turning white, gasping for air as the room spun around me. They had broken her. They had left her to bleed while they protected their assets. And then they had looked me directly in the eyes and blamed me for the entire tragedy. I turned on the faucet, rinsed my mouth, and splashed freezing water over my face. The operational firewall I had built in my mind snapped firmly back into place. The shock was gone. The grief was entirely eradicated. Only the mission remained. I walked back to the dining room table. I executed a secure batch download protocol. I pulled the raw, uncompressed 4K video files, the synchronized audio tracks, and the network access logs. I routed everything directly into the military-grade offline encrypted hard drive plugged into my server array. The progress bar flashed green, confirming total data retention. Detective Rossi had told me that raw anger would only get me locked in a psychiatric ward. He had told me I needed digital bulletproof proof if I wanted to breach their fortress of privilege. I pulled the encrypted drive from the port and held the heavy metal casing in my hand. It was no longer just a storage device. It was a digital guillotine. Jamal and Beatrice thought they were playing a game of family court chess against an unstable, exhausted mother. They had no idea they had just initiated a scorched earth protocol. I packed my hardware back into the hidden wall safe, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door. It was time to hunt. I walked out the front door and locked the heavy brass deadbolt behind me. The crisp Seattle air hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing. The frantic, weeping, submissive mother Jamal expected to find was dead. The woman walking briskly to the SUV was an architect of total ruin. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and stared at the leather steering wheel. My immediate, visceral instinct was to drive straight to the local police precinct. I wanted to slam the encrypted flash drive onto the watch commander's desk and demand that my husband and my mother-in-law be arrested immediately for aggravated child abuse and evidence tampering. It was a deeply tempting fantasy. It was also a massive tactical error that would instantly destroy my entire case. Beatrice did not just have political influence in this city. She practically owned the municipality. She played golf with the chief of police every Sunday morning at her private country club. She funded his re-election campaigns for the police union board through anonymous political action committee donations. If I walked into that local precinct with my evidence, a sympathetic desk sergeant would log it, and within 10 minutes, Beatrice would receive a discreet private phone call. My digital drive would mysteriously vanish from the evidence room, written off as a regrettable clerical error. The local authorities were completely and hopelessly compromised. I needed a much bigger hammer. I needed a force of nature that Beatrice could not manipulate, bribe, or intimidate. I pulled out of the pristine neighborhood and drove toward the industrial district, seeking a location entirely off the family radar. I found a rundown cash-only motel near the commercial shipping yards. It was exactly the kind of place where privacy was guaranteed by sheer apathy. I rented a room on the second floor, locked the heavy metal door, and drew the thick blackout curtains tight. I pulled my secondary untraceable laptop from my tactical bag. I needed a secure line directly to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago, while contracted by the Department of Defense, I was pulled into a highly classified joint task force tracking a massive international cyber terrorism syndicate. The lead federal prosecutor on that case was an absolute bulldog named Marcus Vance. Marcus did not care about local politics. He did not care about generational wealth, social status, or elite country club memberships. He cared about ironclad convictions and dismantling criminal empires. We had spent 6 months tearing down terror cells together, and he knew exactly what I was capable of in the digital battle space. I booted up a heavily encrypted peer-to-peer communication terminal and initiated a direct handshake protocol with Marcus's private federal server. It took exactly 4 minutes for his secure terminal to accept the ping. A secure text prompt blinked on my screen. Marcus demanded immediate verification. I typed in our old classified operational call sign, followed by a request for a Level 1 secure video conference. The screen transitioned, and Marcus appeared, sitting in his federal office across the country. He looked exactly the same sharp, in a tailored suit, visibly exhausted and intensely focused. He asked what was so critical that I was burning an emergency encrypted channel. I did not waste time with pleasantries or catching up on old times. I told him I had a massive wire fraud, money laundering, and child endangerment case that involved severe local political corruption. I told him local law enforcement was thoroughly compromised and I needed federal intervention immediately. Marcus leaned forward, his professional curiosity instantly engaged. I initiated a secure file transfer. I sent him the financial ledgers first. I walked him through the data in real time as the files populated on his screen. I showed him how my classified military hazard pay was being systematically drained into offshore shell accounts while I was deployed in active combat zones. I traced the complex cryptocurrency exchanges directly to Jamal's illegal sports betting syndicates. Then I showed him the secondary, far more sinister money stream. I mapped the path of the stolen funds straight into Harper's luxury boutique in downtown Seattle. I pulled up the tax records I had hacked, proving the boutique was functionally bankrupt, but showing massive unexplained cash deposits week after week. It was textbook money laundering. Harper was taking my stolen hazard pay, washing it through her fake retail sales, and funneling it cleanly into Beatrice's mayoral campaign war chest. They were funding a local political empire with stolen military assets. Marcus was silent as he reviewed the cascading columns of data. He was a veteran prosecutor and he knew a slam-dunk, racketeer, influenced and corrupt organizations case when he saw one. He told me the financial crimes alone carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison for each conspirator. But I was not finished. I told Marcus that the financial crimes were just the foundation. I needed him to see the catalyst. I warned him that the next file was highly graphic and deeply personal. I sent the uncompressed 4K video of the staircase. I watched Marcus's face through the webcam as he opened the file. I watched the color completely drain from his features. I saw his jaw clench so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. He watched Beatrice strike a 6-year-old child over a spilled glass of juice. He watched my daughter Aaliyah tumble down the sharp hardwood stairs. He watched Jamal step casually over his bleeding, unconscious daughter to wipe away his mother's fingerprints and stage a bicycle accident to protect their political reputation. When the video ended, the silence in the encrypted chat room was deafening. Marcus looked back at the camera. The analytical, detached prosecutor was gone, replaced by a man radiating pure, cold fury. He told me he was escalating this directly to the director of the FBI. He said they were bypassing the local police completely. The state authorities would not even know what hit them until the federal indictments were unsealed and the handcuffs clicked shut. We spent the next 4 hours building the shadow docket. Marcus drafted the federal warrants for wire fraud, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, aggravated child abuse, and obstruction of justice. He assigned a specialized FBI rapid response team based out of the Seattle field office to handle the arrests. They wanted to move fast. They wanted to tear Beatrice's corrupt empire down to the studs before she could even formulate a defense. But Marcus hit a severe logistical roadblock. He called me back on the secure line just before midnight. He explained that federal raids of this magnitude required absolute, flawless precision. Beatrice, Jamal, and Harper lived in 3 separate, highly secured locations across the city. If the FBI hit Beatrice's sprawling estate first, her private security might manage to send out a warning text. If Jamal or Harper got tipped off even by a margin of a few minutes, they could initiate a remote wipe of their remaining devices and destroy the secondary physical evidence we needed to lock them away forever. The feds needed all three conspirators contained simultaneously. They needed to seize the phones, the laptops, and the individuals at the exact same moment to ensure the RICO charges remained totally airtight. Marcus asked me if there was a way to isolate them. He asked if I knew a location where they would all be gathered together, unsuspecting and vulnerable, within the next 48 hours. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair, a slow, icy smile spread across my face. I told Marcus he did not need to worry about hunting them down across the city. I knew exactly where they were going to be. Tomorrow afternoon, Beatrice was hosting a highly publicized exclusive campaign fundraiser at her elite country club. It was the absolute pinnacle social event of the season. Jamal and Harper were explicitly required to attend to project the image of a perfect, unified, untouchable family. They were going to be standing in a grand ballroom, surrounded by the city's wealthy elite, drinking expensive champagne and celebrating their absolute superiority. I told Marcus to tell his agents to suit up in their tactical gear. We were going to a party. The thick manila envelope arrived by private courier the following morning. I sat at the wobbly laminate desk in my cheap motel room, cracked the seal, and read through the divorce and custody petition Jamal had his high-priced legal team draft. It was an absolute unmitigated massacre on paper. He was not just asking for a divorce. He was executing a hostile takeover of my entire existence. He demanded sole physical and legal custody of Aaliyah, citing my military deployments, my dangerous profession, and my alleged recent mental instability as a severe danger to her well-being. He wanted the house, the remaining liquid assets, and a staggering amount of permanent alimony. His lawyers had the audacity to claim that my career had hindered his own earning potential, conveniently ignoring the fact that my hazard pay was currently keeping him out of the hands of violent bookies. He even included a restraining order petition demanding I remain 500 feet away from Beatrice's estate at all times. It was a financial and emotional execution. I pulled out my secure phone, snapped a photo of the signature page, and sent it through the encrypted tunnel to Marcus. The trap was officially baited. Then I dressed for my own funeral. I needed to look exactly like the casualty they believed they had created. I chose a faded, oversized gray sweater, jeans, and scuffed boots. I washed my face, applying no makeup, letting the dark, exhausted circles under my eyes show prominently. I let my posture slump, practicing the shallow, defeated breathing of a woman who had just lost her child. I was back in the combat zone, but this time the camouflage was submission. I drove to L'Etoile, an aggressively exclusive French restaurant in the heart of downtown Seattle. It was the kind of establishment where a single appetizer cost more than a week of groceries, a place where the city's power brokers went to be seen. It was Beatrice's favorite place to hold court, and she had chosen it deliberately to emphasize the absolute disparity in our current power dynamics. The maitre d' looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain, before leading me to a private, velvet-lined alcove table near the back. Jamal and Beatrice were already seated, radiating an aura of arrogant triumph that practically suffocated the air around them. Jamal wore a custom-tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful, unbothered executive. Beatrice was draped in immaculate cream cashmere, her signature pearl necklace resting perfectly against her collarbone. A bottle of vintage champagne was already chilling in a silver bucket beside their table. 2 crystal flutes were filled. They were celebrating before I even sat down. "Sit," Beatrice commanded, not bothering to offer a greeting or lower her voice. I slid into the plush leather chair, keeping my shoulders hunched and my eyes firmly downcast. I let my hands tremble slightly as I folded them in my lap, staring at the pristine white tablecloth. Jamal did not say a word. He simply pushed the thick stack of legal documents across the table until they bumped against my water glass. He placed a heavy gold fountain pen on top of the pile. "Read them if you want," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But it will not change the outcome. My lawyers have made it completely airtight. You surrender the house, you surrender the accounts, and you grant me full legal and physical custody of Aaliyah. You get supervised visitation 1 weekend a month, assuming you can pass a court-mandated psychological evaluation and a drug screen. I looked up at him, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper to force tears to pool in my eyes. You cannot take my daughter, Jamal, I whispered, allowing a desperate, pathetic tremor to crack my voice. Please, I will give you the money. I will give you the house. Just let me have joint custody. She is my baby, Beatrice scoffed, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. You have no position to negotiate, Kendra. You are a violent, unstable woman who abandoned her child for a paycheck. You are lucky we are not pressing criminal charges for your little break-in yesterday. Harper was deeply traumatized by your aggressive, erratic behavior. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my space. You brought this on yourself. If you had just stayed in your lane, if you had just been a normal, compliant wife, none of this would be happening. But you had to push. You had to act crazy at the hospital. Now you lose everything. I looked down at the papers. The physical act of signing away my child, even knowing it was a tactical ruse, went against every protective maternal instinct in my body. My hand hovered over the gold pen. I thought of the video. I thought of Beatrice striking my daughter. I thought of Jamal wiping his mother's fingerprints off the banister while Aaliyah bled on the floor. I thought of Marcus and the federal strike team currently finalizing their breach protocols for the weekend. I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold and heavy. If I sign this, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, looking directly into Jamal's eyes, will you at least promise not to hurt her anymore? Jamal rolled his eyes, a gesture of profound, callous annoyance. Do not start with your paranoid delusions again. Aaliyah tripped on the stairs because she is clumsy and hyperactive. She will be perfectly safe in a stable, wealthy, two-parent household with me and my mother. Now, sign the papers, Kendra. We have real business to attend to, and looking at you is ruining my appetite. I pressed the nib of the pen to the heavy paper. I signed my name on the first line, then the second. I initialed every single page, legally surrendering my entire life, my assets and my child, to the monsters sitting across from me. My hand shook violently on the final signature. I pushed the signed documents back across the table. Jamal snatched them up immediately. He flipped through the pages, inspecting the signatures with a hungry, predatory gleam in his eyes, ensuring I hadn't missed a single initial. He nodded to his mother, a silent confirmation of total victory. Beatrice leaned forward, interlacing her manicured fingers. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute unfiltered disgust. It really is for the best, she said softly, twisting the psychological knife with practiced precision. You should stick to wars overseas, dear. You were never smart enough for the ones at home. I kept my head down, letting a single tear fall onto the white tablecloth. You win, I whispered. Of course we do, Beatrice replied smoothly, signaling the waiter to pour more champagne. We are the Blackwells. We represent the foundational pillars of this community. We do not lose to street-level thugs playing soldier. She turned her attention entirely away from me, dismissing my existence the exact second she got what she wanted. She looked at her son, her eyes shining with fierce political ambition. The final preparations for the gala this Saturday are complete. The network has confirmed they will be broadcasting the opening remarks live during the evening news cycle. I sat perfectly still, making myself as small as possible, absorbing every syllable of the intelligence. It is going to be the crowning moment of the Family Values campaign, Beatrice continued, practically glowing with self-importance. The mayor will be there, the chief of police is introducing me on the main stage, and we have sold out every single donor table. The entire city's elite will be in that room. I need you and Harper to be at the venue by 6 sharp. You will be seated with me on the dais as the guests of honor. The media needs to see the united, prosperous front of our family. It will completely bury any lingering rumors from your unfortunate first marriage. We will project total perfection. Jamal nodded carefully, sliding the divorce papers into his designer leather briefcase. Do not worry, Mother. Harper has already picked out her dress from the boutique. We will be there. We will give the press exactly what they want to see, the devoted father and the powerful matriarch. Excellent, Beatrice said, raising her crystal flute. To new beginnings and leaving the trash where it belongs. Jamal clinked his glass against hers. The sharp ring of crystal echoed in the alcove. They drank their champagne. They did not even look at me. I was a ghost to them now, a conquered enemy fading into the background of their magnificent success story. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a harsh scrape against the floor. I did not say another word. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, keeping my pace slow, my shoulders slumped, playing the defeated victim all the way through the dining room and out the heavy glass doors. I kept the act up until I reached the safety of my rented SUV. Once the heavy car door slammed shut, the trembling stopped completely. The tears dried instantly. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders and cracking my neck. I reached into my cargo pocket, pulled out my secure phone and dialed Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. They took the bait. I said, my voice cold, sharp, and hard as steel. They have the signed papers. They think I am completely neutralized and entirely broken. And the location, Marcus asked, the sharp edge of predatory anticipation in his voice. Saturday night, I replied, staring at the glittering facade of the restaurant through my windshield. 6 o'clock. The grand ballroom at the elite country club. Beatrice is hosting her massive televised family values campaign gala. Jamal and Harper will be on the main stage with her as the guests of honor. The chief of police will be in the room. The entire corrupt political and financial network will be sitting in one place, broadcast live to the entire city. I heard Marcus exhale a slow, deeply satisfied breath over the encrypted line. It is a tactical dream, he said. I am mobilizing the strike teams now. We will breach the perimeter at exactly 6:15. Enjoy the rest of your week, Kendra. The war is over. I disconnected the call and dropped the phone into the passenger seat. I looked back at the restaurant, visualizing the federal agents swarming the ballroom, the shock on Beatrice's face, the federal handcuffs clicking around Jamal's wrists on live television. I had given them my signature. I had given them their fleeting victory. But on Saturday night, I was going to give them an absolute massacre. Saturday night arrived with the kind of biting, rain-slicked chill that defined Seattle winters. The grand ballroom of the downtown luxury hotel was a fortress of privilege, insulated from the weather and reality by layers of private security and exorbitant wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering glow over the city's political elite, corporate donors, and carefully selected members of the press. Massive silk banners bearing the slogan, Beatrice Blackwell Family Values for a Safer Seattle, hung behind a raised mahogany podium. Beatrice was holding court in the center of the room. She was draped in an emerald green designer gown, a benevolent smile fixed on her face as she shook hands with wealthy developers and local judges. Jamal stood faithfully at her right side, playing the role of the devoted son and successful executive, charming a group of venture capitalists with practiced ease. Harper lingered near the open bar, sipping a dry martini, wearing a diamond necklace that I knew for a fact had been purchased using funds meant for my daughter's non-existent private school tuition. They were entirely in their element. They believed they were untouchable. I stepped out of my rented town car and handed the keys to the valet. I had abandoned the oversized gray sweater and the defeated posture I wore at the restaurant. Tonight, I was going to war, and I had dressed accordingly. I wore a tailored floor-length crimson gown that hugged my frame and swept the polished marble floor. It was a dress designed to demand attention, a striking splash of blood red against a sea of conservative black tuxedos and muted evening wear. My posture was military straight. My expression was an icy, impenetrable mask of absolute calm. I walked past the primary security checkpoint at the ballroom entrance. Jamal had not thought to put my name on a do not admit list because he truly believed I was sitting in my empty house crying over the divorce papers I had surrendered to him. I glided into the ballroom, the heavy wooden doors shutting behind me, sealing me inside the lion's den. It took exactly 14 seconds for someone to notice. Jamal was mid-laugh, holding a tumbler of scotch, when his eyes tracked across the room and locked onto me. The laugh died in his throat. His scotch tipped dangerously, splashing amber liquid onto his expensive leather shoes. He grabbed his mother's arm, his fingers digging into her emerald silk sleeve. Beatrice turned her benevolent smile freezing into a rigid, horrified grimace. Harper spotted me a moment later. Her eyes widened in genuine shock before hardening into fury. She slammed her martini glass onto a passing waiter's tray and marched directly across the crowded floor to intercept me. She moved with aggressive, entitled speed, intending to physically block my path before I could reach the central donor tables. "What the hell do you think you are doing here?" Harper hissed, stopping inches from my face. Her voice was pitched low to avoid drawing the attention of the nearby press corps, but her eyes were venomous. "You are not invited, Kendra. You are trespassing." I did not stop walking. I simply maintained my pace, forcing Harper to step backward awkwardly in her high heels or risk a physical collision. "I'm attending a public campaign event," I replied, my voice a quiet, terrifying monotone. "It is a lovely venue, Harper. Did my combat hazard pay cover the floral arrangements?" Harper's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You listen to me, you psychotic broke loser," she snarled, stepping into my path again. "I am walking over to that security detail right now. I am going to tell them you are a stalker and a threat to the mayoral candidate. They will drag you out the service elevator and throw you onto the street. Turn around and leave before I ruin you in front of the entire city." I stopped. I looked Harper directly in the eyes. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of an apex predator watching a mouse threaten a trap. "Go ahead, Harper," I whispered, stepping smoothly to my right and bypassing her completely. "Make sure the cameras are rolling when you do." I left her standing frozen in the middle of the aisle and continued my purposeful march along the perimeter of the ballroom. I was not heading toward Beatrice. I was not heading toward the podium. I was heading directly toward the elevated audio-visual control booth situated at the rear of the hall. The booth was partitioned by a low velvet rope manned by 2 hotel technicians who were busy monitoring the lighting cues and microphone feeds for the upcoming speech. I slipped a cloned radio frequency identification keycard from my clutch. I had spent yesterday morning sitting in a coffee shop across the street intercepting the hotel's unencrypted employee network traffic. I swiped the cloned card against the security scanner on the booth's access gate. The light blinked green. I stepped inside the booth, sliding quietly into the shadows behind the primary server rack. The technicians did not even look back. From my vantage point, I had a perfect unobstructed view of the stage. Beatrice was stepping up to the podium, her political smile firmly back in place. The crowd quieted as the ambient music faded out. Camera flashes erupted from the press pit. Jamal stood slightly behind her, looking nervous, his eyes frantically scanning the crowd, trying to locate me. "Thank you, my friends." Beatrice began, her voice echoing through the massive line array speakers suspended from the ceiling. "Thank you for being here tonight. When I decided to run for mayor of this beautiful city, I did so with one core principle in mind: family." The crowd broke into polite, wealthy applause. Beatrice bowed her head, playing the humble servant perfectly. She raised her hand to quiet them, her face transitioning into a mask of brave, manufactured sorrow. "Family is the bedrock of our society," Beatrice continued, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "And recent events have reminded me just how fragile that bedrock can be. As many of you know, my sweet, innocent granddaughter Aaliyah is currently in the pediatric ward at Seattle General." A collective murmur of sympathy washed over the ballroom. "She suffered a terrible accident," Beatrice said, wiping an invisible tear from her cheek. "But through the grace of God and the unwavering, dedicated love of her father Jamal, she is recovering. We have had to step up to protect her. We have had to become her shield against the instability of a world that does not always put children first. That is what family does. We step up when others walk away." The sheer sickening hypocrisy of her words was paralyzing. She was standing on a stage soliciting campaign donations while publicly labeling me a negligent mother and using the child she had physically shattered as a political prop. I reached into the neckline of my gown and pulled out a small modified USB decryption dongle. I plugged it directly into the open administrative port on the hotel's primary media server. I pulled my secure smartphone from my clutch. I had my stage. The federal agents were waiting outside the doors. The timer hit exactly 6:14. I executed the remote override script. On stage, Beatrice took a deep breath to continue her tearful monologue. We will not let the darkness win. We will not let a deafening, high-pitched screech of audio feedback blasted through the ballroom speakers. Beatrice flinched, covering her ears and taking a startled step back from the podium. The microphone on the stand glowed red for a microsecond before sparking and dying completely. A heavy, confused silence fell over the room. The four massive high-definition projector screens hanging behind the stage flickered wildly. The polished campaign logos displaying Beatrice's face vanished, replaced by a wall of absolute solid black. "Fix it," Beatrice hissed at the event coordinator, her voice carrying through the quiet room even without the microphone. "Turn it back on." I tapped the screen of my phone. The projector screens flashed blindingly white, illuminating the dark ballroom. The image that materialized was not a campaign video. It was a massive, highly magnified bank ledger. The financial documents spanned all four screens, stretching 20 feet high. I had highlighted specific columns in bright, glowing crimson. The crowd of wealthy donors, corporate executives, and local journalists stared in total confusion as a digital red arrow traced a wire transfer of $12,000 originating from a United States Department of Defense payroll account. The arrow snaked across the screen, showing the money moving into an offshore shell company and then routing directly into the corporate operating account of Harper's luxury boutique. Before the crowd could process the first image, the screen shifted. Another red arrow traced a second transfer, $25,000. Moving from Harper's boutique, labeled as an anonymous private donation, directly into the official Beatrice Blackwell Mayoral Campaign Action Committee Fund. A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the ballroom. These were financial experts. They were venture capitalists and bankers. They did not need a forensic accountant to explain what they were looking at. They were looking at federal wire fraud. They were looking at a mayoral candidate laundering stolen military wages to fund her own election. "Turn the screens off," Jamal screamed, abandoning his calm demeanor and lunging toward the edge of the stage. "Cut the main power." The two hotel technicians in the booth scrambled frantically over their keyboards. One of them slammed his hand against the master kill switch. Nothing happened. The screens remained brightly lit. "I have lost admin access," one technician yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Someone has locked the system. I cannot drop the feed." The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a clear, high-resolution photograph of Harper, completely unaware, standing in my kitchen just yesterday. Then the audio kicked in. I routed the sound file through the concert-grade amplifiers, pushing the volume to the absolute maximum threshold. Harper's voice thundered from the ceiling, echoing off the marble walls with terrifying clarity. "Beatrice did not set out to break her arm." Harper's recorded voice boomed, drowning out the panicked shouting of the crowd. "She was simply enforcing boundaries that you completely failed to establish." Harper, standing near the bar, dropped her martini glass. It shattered on the marble floor. She threw her hands over her mouth, her face draining of all color. The press corps instantly pivoted away from the stage. Dozens of camera lenses and flashing strobes locked directly onto Harper. "You discipline a child who refuses to submit to authority." The audio recording roared on, merciless and perfectly clear. "Do you have any idea how disruptive it is to have a child screaming for a mother who is halfway across the world dodging bullets?" Beatrice had to show her who was actually in charge. She had to break that defiance. Beatrice had to lock her in the basement just to get some peace and quiet. The ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. Wealthy donors backed away from the stage in absolute horror. The chief of police, sitting at the front table, stood up rapidly, his face turning a sickly shade of gray, as he realized his political ally was detonating on live television. When Beatrice opened the door to let her out, Aaliyah tried to run. Harper's voice continued sealing their fate. Beatrice simply grabbed her arm to stop her from running away, and the little brat twisted away so hard she snapped her own bone. Beatrice was hyperventilating on stage. Her pristine composure was completely shattered. She clawed at her own pearl necklace, her eyes wild with terror as she looked at the sea of journalists actively recording her destruction. "This is a lie," Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It is a deep fake. It is a setup. Security. Arrest whoever is doing this. Jamal grabbed his mother by the arm, trying to pull her toward the service exit behind the stage. "We have to leave," he shouted over the noise. "We have to go now." I stood in the shadows of the AV booth. I looked down at my phone. The digital clock ticked over to exactly 6:15. I tapped the final command script. The audio recording of Harper cut off abruptly. The massive projector screens behind the stage flickered and went entirely black for one single agonizing second. The crowd held its breath, completely captivated by the digital hijacking. The screens flared to life one last time. I initiated the playback of the 4K cloud video. The uncompressed, undeniable footage of Beatrice standing at the top of the staircase staring down at my 6-year-old daughter. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked into place with a satisfying metallic thud, sealing the empty house behind me. The crisp Seattle wind hit my face, but I felt absolutely nothing. The frantic, weeping, submissive mother Jamal expected to find was completely dead. The woman walking briskly to the rented SUV was an architect of total ruin. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and stared blankly at the leather steering wheel. My immediate visceral instinct was to throw the vehicle into gear drive straight to the local police precinct and slam the encrypted flash drive onto the watch commander's desk. I wanted to demand that my husband and my mother-in-law be arrested immediately for aggravated child abuse and evidence tampering. It was a deeply tempting, entirely justifiable fantasy. It was also a massive tactical error that would instantly destroy my entire case and leave my daughter trapped in a nightmare forever. Beatrice did not just have political influence in this city. She practically owned the municipality. She played golf with the chief of police every Sunday morning at her private, heavily guarded country club. She funded his re-election campaigns for the police union board through anonymous political action committee donations. If I walked into that local precinct with my digital evidence, a sympathetic desk sergeant would log it into the system, and within 10 minutes, Beatrice would receive a discreet private phone call. My digital drive would mysteriously vanish from the evidence room, written off as a regrettable clerical error. I would likely find myself arrested on fabricated charges of trespassing or harassment before the sun went down. The local authorities were completely and hopelessly compromised. I needed a much bigger hammer. I needed a force of nature that Beatrice could not manipulate, bribe, or intimidate. I pulled out of the pristine, manicured neighborhood and drove toward the industrial shipping district, seeking a location entirely off the family radar. I needed absolute digital anonymity to establish a secure line. I found a rundown cash-only motel near the commercial shipping yards. It was exactly the kind of place where privacy was guaranteed by sheer apathy. The clerk barely looked at me as I slid a crisp $50 bill across the scarred laminate counter. I rented a room on the second floor, locked the heavy metal door behind me, and drew the thick, nicotine-stained blackout curtains tight. I pulled my secondary, untraceable tactical laptop from my bag. I needed a secure line directly to Washington, D.C. 2 years ago, while contracted by the Department of Defense, I was pulled into a highly classified joint task force tracking a massive international cyber terrorism syndicate. The lead federal prosecutor on that case was an absolute bulldog named Marcus Vance. Marcus did not care about local politics. He did not care about generational wealth, social status, or elite country club memberships. He cared about ironclad convictions, dismantling criminal empires, and putting dangerous people in federal penitentiaries for a very long time. We had spent 6 exhausting months tearing down terror cells together, and he knew exactly what I was capable of in the digital battlespace. He trusted my intelligence gathering implicitly. I booted up a heavily encrypted peer-to-peer communication terminal and initiated a direct handshake protocol with Marcus's private federal server. It took exactly 4 minutes for his secure terminal to accept the ping and establish a heavily guarded tunnel through the network. A secure text prompt blinked on my screen. Marcus demanded immediate verification. I typed in our old classified operational call sign, followed by a request for a Level 1 secure video conference. The screen transitioned, and Marcus appeared sitting in his federal office across the country. He looked exactly the same, sharp, in a tailored suit, visibly exhausted and intensely focused. He asked what was so critical that I was burning an emergency encrypted channel on a weekday afternoon. I did not waste time with pleasantries or catching up on old times. I looked directly into the webcam and told him I had a massive wire fraud, money laundering, and child endangerment case that involved severe local political corruption. I explicitly told him that local law enforcement was thoroughly compromised by the primary target and that I needed federal intervention immediately. Marcus leaned forward, his professional curiosity instantly engaged. He asked for the data. I initiated a secure file transfer protocol. I sent him the massive decrypted financial ledgers first. I walked him through the data in real time as the cascading files populated on his screen. I showed him how my classified military hazard pay was being systematically drained into offshore shell accounts while I was deployed in active hostile combat zones. I traced the complex cryptocurrency exchanges directly to Jamal's illegal sports betting syndicates. I showed Marcus how Jamal was hemorrhaging cash, creating a desperate need for capital. Then I showed him the secondary, far more sinister money stream. I mapped the path of the stolen funds straight into Harper's luxury boutique in downtown Seattle. I pulled up the state tax records and inventory logs I had hacked, proving the boutique was functionally bankrupt, selling virtually no actual merchandise, but showing massive unexplained cash deposits week after week. It was textbook money laundering. Harper was taking my stolen hazard pay, washing it through her fake retail sales to make it look like legitimate business revenue, and funneling it cleanly into Beatrice's mayoral campaign war chest. They were funding a corrupt local political empire with stolen military assets. Marcus was completely silent as he reviewed the columns of undeniable data. He was a veteran prosecutor, and he knew a slam-dunk racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization's case when he saw one. He told me the financial crimes alone carried a mandatory minimum of 20 years in federal prison for each conspirator. The paper trail was absolutely flawless. The shell companies, the fake retail invoices, the campaign finance violations, all of it was meticulously documented and backed by raw banking data. But I was not finished. I told Marcus that the financial crimes were just the foundation. I needed him to see the catalyst. I warned him that the next file was highly graphic, deeply personal, and required immediate action. I sent the uncompressed 4K video of the staircase. I sat in the quiet, dim motel room and watched Marcus's face through the webcam as he opened the media file. I watched the color completely drain from his features. I saw his jaw clench so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter under the pressure. He watched Beatrice strike a 6-year-old child over a spilled glass of juice. He watched my daughter Aaliyah tumble down the sharp hardwood stairs. He watched Jamal step casually over his bleeding, unconscious daughter to wipe away his mother's fingerprints and stage a bicycle accident to protect their political reputation. When the video finally ended, the silence in the encrypted chat room was deafening. Marcus looked back at the camera. The analytical, detached prosecutor was completely gone, replaced by a man radiating pure, cold fury. He did not ask any questions about the legality of the video acquisition. He told me he was escalating this directly to the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation within the hour. He stated unequivocally that they were bypassing the local police completely. The state authorities and the corrupt chief of police would not even know what hit them until the federal indictments were unsealed and the handcuffs clicked shut. We spent the next 4 hours building the shadow docket. Marcus drafted the preliminary federal warrants for wire fraud, money laundering, criminal conspiracy, aggravated child abuse, and obstruction of justice. He assigned a specialized FBI rapid response team, based out of the Seattle field office, to handle the imminent arrests. They wanted to move fast. They wanted to tear Beatrice's corrupt empire down to the studs before she could even formulate a defense or call in a political favor. But Marcus hit a severe logistical roadblock. He rubbed his temples staring at the tactical map on his screen. He called me back on the secure audio line just before midnight. He explained that federal raids of this specific magnitude required absolute flawless precision. Beatrice, Jamal, and Harper lived in 3 separate highly secured locations across the city. If the FBI hit Beatrice's sprawling estate first, her private security detail might manage to send out a warning text. If Jamal or Harper got tipped off even by a margin of a few minutes, they could initiate a remote wipe of their remaining devices and destroy the secondary physical evidence we needed to lock them away forever. The feds needed all 3 conspirators contained simultaneously. They needed to seize the phones, the laptops, and the individuals at the exact same moment to ensure the RICO charges remained totally airtight. Marcus asked me if there was a way to isolate them. He asked if I knew a location where they would all be gathered together, unsuspecting and vulnerable within the next few days. He needed a controlled environment where the federal strike team could secure the perimeter and execute a coordinated simultaneous breach. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair, staring at the blinking cursor on my encrypted terminal. A slow, icy smile spread across my face as the pieces of the puzzle perfectly aligned. I thought about the sheer arrogance of the Blackwell family. I thought about their desperate need for public validation and their insatiable hunger for political power. I told Marcus he did not need to worry about hunting them down across the city or planning 3 separate tactical raids. I did not need to guess their itinerary. I knew exactly where they were going to be. I pulled up the digital calendar I had scraped from Beatrice's server. Tomorrow evening, Beatrice was hosting a highly publicized, incredibly exclusive campaign fundraiser at her elite downtown country club. It was the absolute pinnacle social event of the season, designed to showcase her platform to the wealthiest donors in the state. Jamal and Harper were explicitly required to attend to project the image of a perfect, unified, untouchable family. They were going to be standing in a grand ballroom surrounded by the city's wealthy elite, drinking expensive champagne and celebrating their absolute superiority. I told Marcus to tell his agents to suit up in their heavy tactical gear and prepare the federal transport vans. We were going to a party, and I was going to ensure they never left it. The most powerful lesson from this story is that your worth is never defined by those who refuse to see it. Toxic family dynamics and cruel favoritism will often make you feel completely invisible and powerless. However, true strength lies in quiet resilience and building absolute financial independence. You do not need their validation to create a meaningful, successful life. When you stop seeking approval from people committed to misunderstanding you, you immediately reclaim your control. The ultimate revenge is simply thriving confidently on your own terms. Please share your personal story about escaping toxic relatives in the comments below.